I'm Chuck Todd.
I'm J.A. Adande.
And welcome to our new show, Dynastic. What do you want to say about it?
Well, the title Dynastic, it's not limited, right? So we're going to be looking at the great dynasties in sports, the great franchises in sports, the great teams in sports.
How they became dynasties, how they got there. Because most of them, you don't start a dynasty.
Right.
And unless you really are born. I can't think of one franchise that started a dynasty unless you're actually born in New York City, maybe.
So, how they became, what made them a dynasty, what the enduring effects are afterward, the legacy, which is the most overused word in sports, but it's also something that I think comes into play here.
Well, look, and every franchise has a story that's just like a human being. And in some ways, that's kind of what we want to do here, is almost break it down. It's like it's the biography, it's the arc of the life of this team. And because we know for fans, this is in some ways, they themselves feel it as almost like a person. The relationship is almost the way you have a relationship with something you love.
So let's get into what the format's going to look like.
Okay.
What our listeners can expect.
Look, we hope to begin, when we take a franchise, so it may be an iconic baseball franchise, basketball, football, hockey. We're going to go college. We're going to go pro. But sort of like and from soup to nuts, how they started, how they, what were the pivotal moments. Every franchise has that near-death experience, believe it or not. Every program has a near-death experience. The lows, the highs, the greatest names associated, you name it.
And also, just for fun at the end, for every franchise that we do, we'll look at the Mount Rushmore. We'll give our Mount Rushmores, and we encourage you, of course, those are subject to debate and lead to a lot of disagreement and arguments. So we'll encourage you through social media, email, whatever platforms you want to use to give us your Mount Rushmore. Tell us how we got it wrong. And we want to try to be interactive here as well.
Now, I know some of you may be thinking, what the hell is Chuck Todd doing there? You may say, J.A., all right, you're a sports guy. I get it. What the hell? But that's the idea. What we want to marry here, if you will. You've been in sports. You've been doing this. You've covered, in some cases, you'll have covered some of these events that we're going to talk about. You know some of the people firsthand. I'm a history junkie, and I'm coming at it sort of the way I come at politics, sort of context, sort of, well, tell me more about this and who were the personalities and who are the drivers. So we thought this would be a unique way to tackle sports history, is have somebody who's sort of almost both fan and historian on one end, reporter and fan on the other end.
And the professor angle of it too. I've been teaching for the better part of 20 years, doing it full time for a decade. And I always try to impart to my students the history. And as a journalist and a journalism professor, one of the most important things we do as journalists is the context, right? So a lot of this is going to be putting things in the context of their time.
And look, and one of the things about sports is that in many ways are the most important cultural changes in society started in sports. Sports is in some ways the first place. So that's why I've always incorporated so much of my political coverage, why yes, I'm a sports fan, but I've also seen it is fused in the politics and history of this country in the same ways that the founding fathers and the documents are.
And in our increasingly fractured, and I'm not even getting into the political aspects of just the media is fractured. Everyone is watching different things on their own devices, but sports are a time and a moment when millions of people simultaneously are experiencing something. So that's another reason that makes it so great to discuss our country, our values, our history through the lens of sports, because it is simultaneously experienced by millions of people.
So look, each episode's going to be a couple hours, and it's going to be one franchise, couple hours. We know you're going to listen to all 17 hours no, I'm kidding, in one sitting. No, we don't expect you to hear it in one sitting, but we're going to break it up and you'll have it. But once a month, we will have a deep dive on one franchise. Within that month, we'll have an interview with an iconic figure from that franchise. And we're looking forward to this. We think that this is something that we hope we're doing for the rest of our professional lives, right, Jay?
Absolutely.
Or we just get through episode 1.
We'll see how this episode goes, and we'll get back to you on the rest of it.
And with that, the first franchise we are tackling,
the Dodgers. As a Los Angeles native, I can only say it that way. When I see the name, I hear Vin Scully's voice saying the Dodgers, from their time in Brooklyn to the transformative move across the country to Los Angeles.
Well, let's, now that we've decided we're starting with the Dodgers, let's quickly do Dodgers by the numbers. Let's put their the franchise baseball card, as you will, right?
Yeah. Here we go. So the Dodgers, 9 World Series championships, 8 in Brooklyn, or 1 in Brooklyn, 8 in LA, and 27 National League pennants.
That's pretty good.
Pretty.
But a losing record in the National League.
Yeah, the Braves and Buffalo Bills, like you get there. That counts for something.
It's worth noting that it's only in this most recent era of the Dodgers that they caught the Giants for most pennants in the National League. So, take that, Giants fans, right?
And they still trail the St. Louis Cardinals
for World Series in the National League. It is Yankees, right, Cardinals, and one would assume that by the end of the Shohei era, maybe they end up grabbing the Cardinals here. They're only 2 behind. They've got 9. They're only 2 behind. All right. They have 15. Dodgers have won 15 MVPs by 13 different players, with obviously the repeat being Shohei back-to-back and Roy Campanella with 3. A lot of individual ones on that one. They've had the most Cy Young Award winners in baseball history, 12 of them. Don Newcomb, Don Drysdale, Sandy Koufax won 3. Mike Marshall. No, not, and you Dodger fans are going, no, not that 80s. Mike Marshall, not 80s Mike Marshall. And no, they were not related. Fernando, of course, in 81, Oral Hershiser. Eric Gagne, can decide whether it was an enhanced Cy Young or not. And of course, Kershaw with 3 on that one. And there's another fun fact: most Rookie of the Year awards in Major League Baseball.
It makes 18. Sense for the Dodgers that I grew up with in the 70s and 80s. So they have 12 retired numbers. Number 1 of Pee Wee Reese, Tommy Lasorda's number 2, Duke Snyder's number 4, Gil Hodges is 14, Jim Gilliam's 19, Don Sutton's 20, Walter Alston's 24, Sandy Koufax's 32, Fernando Valenzuela's 34, Roy Campanella's 39, Jackie Robinson's 42, which was retired throughout baseball, and Don Drysdale's 53. Fernando's the exception among those groups. Can you understand what sets
What is
apart?
That exception? It's a burr in my you-know-what. He's not only one not in the Hall of Fame, right?
Only that, yeah, because that was the criterion. That was why for so long his number had not been retired by the Dodgers, because they have a requirement that you need to be in the Hall of Fame in order to have your jersey.
In our 18th episode on the Dodgers, I will make an entire case of why Fernando, and some of us 80s Dodgers fans still blame Tommy Lasorda for burning out Fernando's arm, but that's okay. You
can make the case.
Tommy was old school.
We'll be talking a lot about Fernando Valenzuela later on.
This is the team of my youth. I grew up a Dodger fan. J.A., did you?
Yes. Although with some Giants fandom mixed in, believe it or not.
Okay.
Because I grew up in LA. My grandparents lived in San Francisco, and they had a close family friend by the name of Franklin Lett, who was a Giants season ticket holder.
So you spent a lot of time at Giants games.
I would go to Candlestick Park. But the first game I ever went to, the first Major League Baseball game I ever went to, was at Dodger Stadium. That was the team of my youth. I was exposed to them as I started getting into sports, and the Dodgers were the team. And there's a moment where it kind of all culminated. To me, the moment that represented the Dodgers and everything that they have done and accomplished and what they mean to Los Angeles, it actually came in New York, back in their ancestral homeland, after the Dodgers beat the Yankees in the World Series in 2024. And Arash Markazi posted this. Friend of mine, a sports journalist, he posted it online on social media. It's a video in a subway station. I'm guessing the stop near Yankee Stadium.
Right.
And it's a bunch of Dodger fans celebrating the World Series victory. Tupac's California Love is playing in the background. And it starts off, you see a Japanese man. He's got a fan with the Japanese flag on it. And, clearly an Ohtani fan who's representing Ohtani. And then there's a Latino man that comes up. There's a black woman. There's white people. There's this, representative of the rich tapestry, not only of Los Angeles, but of Dodger fandom, and what this franchise has meant to so many people, from Jackie Robinson to Shohei Ohtani, Fernando Valenzuela. And it all kind of comes together in this moment across the country from where they are now, but back in their ancestral homeland of New York.
Well, and what's great is they've kind of always been the team of sort of new America, new Americans, right? Brooklyn at the time in the late 19th century is a borough of immigrants. And so they were always sort of, in some ways, the outsiders trying to push in to become the insiders. Look, I'd say this was the team of my youth. I grew up in Miami, Florida. You think, what? We didn't have any professional baseball. My dad was a Dodger fan because he met Roy Campanella as a kid. So, of course,
Dodger catcher.
A great Dodger catcher. Met him right here in Chicago, actually, when he was a kid. There's this great family story about my dad went up to him because actually, I think my grandfather recognized him. I don't think my dad was like 5 or 6, and he says, "Why don't you go ask him why he's not eating his Wheaties?" Because he had just won the MVP, and back then you were on the cover. That was, forget the cover of Sports Illustrated, the cover of Wheaties. That was a big deal if you were a big gold medal winner and baseball MVP. So there's Roy Campanella, and he wasn't eating his Wheaties. They go on to lose to the Cubs that day. They're staying in, I believe it's a Drake Hotel. Campanella goes up to my father the next day and he says, "Hey, don't worry, I'm eating my Wheaties today." So it has been family lore, and it's one of those, you think, all right, is that too good to check? But for what it's worth, I have a second source on it. My dad's sister witnessed the moment, and she swears, she's still alive today. My dad's not with us. She swears it also happened too. So that's how I came about my Dodger fandom, brainwashed by a father, because isn't that what fathers do to sons?
Well, that is something that gets passed down. And, the Dodgers have meant so much to so many people. And it's funny how the Brooklyn people, the New Yorkers, could never quite let go.
Well, think about this. I was thinking about this. What other franchise has its previous identity still a part of its tapestry, right? There is something like, you go to a Dodger game in Dodger Stadium and you'll see almost as many hats with bees on it as you do with LA, right?
Absolutely. And the fact that one thing that was seamless was Jackie Robinson, celebrated so much as an LA Dodger.
Never once played as an LA Dodger.
No. But he feels very LA. There's a statue of him outside the park. I don't think you can think of that for any other franchise that moved it.
They're the other right. I mean, think about it. We have the Oakland A's or the Sacramento A's or the Philadelphia A's or the Kansas City. None of their previous stops are that. You don't feel that way with the Braves. You don't think about, even though Hank Aaron's best days are with Milwaukee. I can't think any of these other franchises, none of them have kept their old cities. I mean, Arizona Cardinals have Chicago in their DNA?
Not at all.
Right?
Not at all. So, I think we'll get into what makes this team so special. How the Jackie Robinson identity could transfer to Los Angeles, even though he never played, even though he was mad at them at the time they were leaving because they just traded him to the Giants. And he wanted no part of playing for their rivals. And yet they were able to get over that. And, still Jackie is very much a part of the identity of this team. In some ways, a lot of people think of it as the foundational part of the team. But
no,
it goes back a lot earlier than that.
And that's the thing. I mean, look, most Dodger fans think the Dodgers were born in 1947. Which is when, and look, for many people, baseball wasn't competitive until 1947. Baseball wasn't baseball until 1947. And that's a very fair way to look at it. But ultimately, the Dodgers' history, yes, the franchise began its march to dynasticdom in 1947, but they had a whole identity for 50 years that was kind of fledgling.
Yeah, they come up to me. I know it starts earlier than this, but to me, the Ebbets Field era. When I think of the Brooklyn Dodgers,
right,
you think of Ebbets Field, opened in 1913, and There's a great description of it in the book Forever Blue, which was one of the source materials we used for this. And the description of it makes me think of the Grand Ballroom in Titanic, the movie, and just that's such a key part of it. And you see it again at the end, right, when Rose is envisioning her life, and so it's described as having. Ebbets Field is described as having an ornate rotunda with a sword dome ceiling, gilded ticket booths with a white Italian marble floor inlaid with red tiles and a pattern of stitches on a baseball. They had chandeliers that looked like bats and baseballs. They had valet parking outside. So
but there's a reason they had to have valet parking, because it was shoved into a city. There was no parking, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why they moved, is because the O'Malleys wanted some parking revenue. But we will get into that as we go further.
So you, what's the early part of the Dodger history?
Well, this is the part that was a lot of fun when we decided to do this, because even as a Dodger fan, both of us thought we knew a lot, and then you realize, oh my God, there's so much more in the early days. So I think you can't lose sight of the fact that the Dodgers were born in 1883. They're not the Dodgers then. They're just sort of this Brooklyn baseball team. It's the same year that the Brooklyn Bridge is completed and the Brooklyn Bridge opened. So you want to pick
which at least the Brooklyn Bridge is still there.
Yeah. But
imagine if O'Malley had taken the Brooklyn Bridge.
As a writer, well, I have a bridge to sell you, right? As a writer, right, could you think of a better sort of parallel construction than the birth of the bridge that connects Manhattan to Brooklyn, and they get a baseball team?
So it's just hard for me to imagine New York without the boroughs being connected.
Brooklyn wasn't even part of New York City at the time. Brooklyn doesn't become New York City. It gets subsumed into New York City in 1898. But it's the borough of immigrants. Let's just say the rich people in Manhattan weren't crazy about the idea that, these Brooklynites can come over here now. Now, of course, it's all the Manhattanites trying to go to Brooklyn.
And the Dodgers really kind of leaned into that identity. They were diverse. The crowds were diverse and reflective. And, just like Brooklyn probably wasn't acknowledged by the Manhattanites,
right?
The Dodgers weren't acknowledged really, and weren't considered a worthy rival to the Yankees, who, by the 1920s are really becoming the New York Yankees, the dynastic team that we think of, one of the major brands in all the sports.
Right. Now, most of you probably know some version of the Dodgers are named after for the trolley Dodgers and all this stuff. But what was interesting in doing our research here is that for essentially the first decade, they didn't have a nickname. They just had whatever sports writers decided to call them for one season. So one season they were the Grays, they were the Atlantics. I love one year 7 players got married in the off season, so they called them the Bridegrooms. How about that for alternative uniform night? Like, let's have the bridegrooms, and maybe we'll have a wedding.
Wearing like a tuxedo, or a top hat,
hats, and tuxedo, right? That would be fun. They were the Super Buzz, whatever the heck that meant.
The Brooklyn Robins, after the nickname of
the manager,
Uncle Robbie Robinson.
So in some ways, they were a team in search of an identity, just like Brooklyn was always constantly searching for its identity. But that's kind of what made them. When you think of, the Dodgers of the 50s are seen as sort of the upstarts, the working class team, and all of this. And in many ways, that was their identity for 50 years. Now, of course, they're Hollywood, they're glamour, they're glitz, they're everything the opposite of what they were born.
But they were Dem Bums, right? Which came from a newspaper editorial cartoon.
I think that's right.
Newspaper cartoonists came up with the Dem Bums nicknames, but, they were hapless. One way to think of it is that the Yankees had Babe Ruth. The Dodgers had Babe Herman, whose pants once caught fire because he had put a lit cigar in them during the game. So that was the Dodgers. But Ebbets Field was, we talked about the personality of the borough. It was kind of a colorful, eclectic place. There was a woman who rang a cowbell there during the games. There was a band called the Dodger Symphony that would play. So, it wasn't a very sophisticated atmosphere, despite the setting. But it was kind of a raucous area.
Every time you read about the Brooklyn Dodgers and the community there, it actually strikes me the way minor league teams today have a connection with their communities, meaning, and that's the way baseball was, right? It was both the only sport in town, but you were constantly having to keep people's attention.
And at the ownership level, it was kind of dysfunctional. There was the Ebbets family and the McKeever family. And
I love the Ebbets story, though, that he actually starts. He's not the first owner. He starts by selling tickets. He got the ownership the old-fashioned way. He was a ticket sales guy, cleaned the stands, and then eventually becomes the owner in the early 1900s.
That's a little more romantic, I'd say, than the Walter O'Malley story, who was the lawyer before he took over the team. But yeah, the heirs, as the original Ebbets and McKeever get older and their heirs kind of take over, they'd spend meetings like just glaring at each other. Like that's how dysfunctional it was. They couldn't even function. And after the original Ebbets died, co-owner took control of the team, but then he dies 2 weeks later after catching a cold at Ebbets' funeral. And I figured the historian in you would appreciate it. It's kind of like President William Henry Harrison,
right? Yeah,
catches a cold at the inaugural after delivering the longest inaugural address on record, dies of a cold. And also kind of reminded me of the popes in the 1980s. Remember how
we had one die immediately after they, same
and
thing.
Like a couple weeks later, there's the conclave again.
We have the second pope. The other fun little fact that I wasn't as familiar with. So the Dodgers, when you're counting up their World Series appearances and the NL pennants, they have one National League pennant that does count in 1890, and they appeared in a World Series that does not count in 1890. So you're asking yourself, well, why is that? Well, it turns out this World Series in 1890 was between the winner of the National League. This was the Brooklyn team's first year in the National League, and the winner of the American Association at the time, which is the Louisville Colonels.
Louisville Sluggers. I didn't know there was a Louisville.
I didn't either. So it is, what's great about this series is that it went 7 games, but one of the games, game 3, ended in a tie.
Darkness?
For darkness. And they said, okay, if it was, so after game 7, they said, well, the managers literally agree before game 7 that whoever wins, they'll just play a deciding game in the spring. Because there was low attendance. There was also a third league. There was a player revolt. They were arguing about the reserve clause. They end up never resolving this World Series. Louisville won 3 games. The Dodgers won 3 games. One game ended in a tie because of darkness and cold. They never resolve it. The Dodgers do get credit for that pennant. But the fun fact of that is actually what you just joked about with the Louisville Slugger, is that there was the Louisville star player was a guy named Pete Browning, and he reportedly used a bat made by a young craftsman named Bud Hillerich.
Hillerich and Bradsby, right?
There you go. And that bat would eventually become the Louisville Slugger.
Wow.
So there's an accidental piece of history that we ended up finding out digging into that.
It's funny because I was going to say, it sounds so un-American to have the championship end in a tie, but yet out of that comes one of the iconic American brands, the Louisville Slugger.
Right. But think about it, that first 10 years, they don't have a nickname. They're all over the place. They end up, they start with Brooklyn when it's his own city. By the end of the 19th century, they're part of New York City. They're still in search of a name. They're still in search of ownership. They're still kind of a team in chaos.
And, it does come together somewhat, and at least you get a foundation at Ebbets Field. But by the late 30s already, the field is starting to fall into disrepair. And you can say that's kind of the beginning of the end, maybe the genesis of why they end up moving to Los Angeles, because their stadium isn't top notch anymore. But that starts to change in the late 30s when Larry MacPhail is the team president, and he comes in and really starts to turn the franchise around.
And that may be, it's sort of like, if you think about the Dodgers and pivot points, I think Larry MacPhail is probably the first most important fork in the road moment for the franchise.
I mean, just to show how, despondent things have gotten, he gets in there, the office telephones have been shut off because they hadn't been paying the bills. There was a great concern the team could go out of business. Like, that's how bad. They later would declare bankruptcy.
But that was a 21st century problem. Right? Yeah. 21st century problem.
But he's forward thinking when you think about a lot of the innovative things, and I think, one way to look at this is the Dodgers were the most forward thinking franchise in sports history. I think it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that.
They always, in some ways, whether it's been in business, and that's really one of the themes that we really want to focus on here is how many different ways they change the game. So everybody knows about Jackie Robinson, but whether it's making the player acquisitions more international, development, sort of perfecting the farm system, even Dodger Town, spring training, doing what they did. What spring training is today, arguably, was a creation of the Dodger system. And even in business, right? The big business that is the Dodgers today, moving to private equity, doing all these, the idea of using a stadium to generate revenue and value for your franchise, that's something Walter O'Malley envisioned, which is why he left Brooklyn.
And, really mastering the regional sports network. I don't know how viable that is in the future, given the current state of regional sports networks, but that's been a huge part of their success. And yes, they're prolific spending in free agency, but part of that is because of the gigantic regional sports network contract.
But in fairness to the Dodgers, the iconic players don't really begin until after Larry MacPhail.
Yeah, but it starts with some of the innovations he does, right? So they had a radio ban, believe it or not. It's what, another way we talk about the icons of the Dodgers, from Red Barber to Vin Scully, these incredible broadcasters that they've had. But they had a radio ban by the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Giants.
They all three agreed never to air teams. Do you hate the blackout rule today in baseball? Well, this was essentially the blackout rule for radio, because all the owners thought if you put the game on radio, people won't show up, because all the revenue back then was tickets.
Right. There were no big, there's no televisions. There's no national TV revenue, even local TV revenue, right? So MacPhail, not only does he end that ban, he puts the Dodgers back on the radio, and he made Red Barber the announcer, one of the all-time greats, and he can pick him there. Larry King once said about Red Barber was an indelible part of my life. He was the best sports announcer I ever heard. His voice is the earliest memory of my life. Him and Arthur Godfrey, I never heard anyone do a baseball game like him. He was a journalist, too.
Well, and this is the thing, and I think this is what most franchises learn, which is that's how so many people, that's the identity. That was their connection to the team, listening to the radio. And having, over time, building that kind of stickiness actually allowed that team to survive. One could argue, if it isn't for MacPhail, that franchise fails.
Yeah,
franchises failed all the time back then.
Yeah, they're teetering. And he was an innovator even before he got to the Dodgers. So when he was with the Cincinnati Reds, they tried the first night game in the majors. Interesting enough, that actually was an idea that came from the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro Leagues.
Right.
So, obviously the Negro Leagues will have a major impact on the Dodgers coming up, but that was one thing. Ebbets Field hosted the first night game in New York, not the first overall.
And how about, this was the accidental part of history here. So the first night game in New York, Ebbets Field happens to host perhaps one of the most historic moments in the history of baseball.
Yeah, the date is June 15th, 1938. It turns out to be the second of Johnny Vandermeer's second back-to-back no-hitters, which to me, quick sidebar here, Chuck.
Yeah.
The most unbreakable record in
Johnny
sports.
Vandermeer, Cincinnati Red, right? We got to make sure that right. Back-to-back no-hitters.
Like, to beat it, you got to throw 3 straight no-hitters.
Yeah,
and in this day and age?
What manager today lets anybody go
3 straight complete games?
Right. If you don't pitch your no-hitter in under 100 pitches, you don't get a shot at your no-hitter anymore.
So we'll go through a few other things that MacPhail added. One of the first organs in a Major League ballpark, an idea he got from the original Madison Square Garden. First night World Series game is played at Ebbets Field in 1939. Interesting tidbit, August of that year in 39, NBC had spent $125,000 on the first mobile broadcast unit for a televised game. There was a couple converted buses. They aired the game through cables that sent the signal to the antennas on top of the Empire State Building. So I thought that was the Dodgers are linked to the Empire State Building quite literally in that moment, at an innovative moment. Not everything worked well. He had a yellow baseball that they tried.
He was kind of, Larry MacPhail is Bill Veeck before Bill Veeck. And I'll be honest. If we have to tell you who Bill Beck is, then you're listening to the wrong podcast. But and I also like this little fact about him. He was the first one to use a plane to fly. He had a team plane to allow his players to go back and forth. And MacPhail developed batting helmets after a Dodger outfielder, Joe Medwick, was struck in the head by a pitch. Wow. And I got to read you this one quote from Leo DeRocha about Larry MacPhail. There's a thin line between genius and insanity, and in Larry's case, it was so thin you could see him drifting back and forth. But that is what you need in an innovator.
Right. Yeah, not everything, again, yellow baseball, maybe not the best ideas. 41, you mentioned DiMaggio's hitting streak. 41, that's the year of the hitting streak. Ted Williams hits 406. The Dodgers win the NL pennant, but they lose to the Yankees. And then comes December 7th, 1941, the day that will live in infamy. And MacPhail actually joins the Army, even though he's older, but he wanted to serve his country at the time, which leads us to Branch Rickey.
And that gets us, and Branch Rickey, who himself is probably one of the, you could argue he's one of the 4 or 5 most important people in the history of baseball, right? I mean, what he did with the Cardinals, first of all, he builds the Cardinals. He is a baseball guy. I mean, that's the thing. Branch Rickey and Walter O'Malley are the, that's probably the first 2 people most people associate when they think of Dodger history. But Branch Rickey, he could have never been with the Dodgers, and he'd have been considered an iconic executive for everything he did with St. Louis, right?
But it's what he does with the Dodgers that, enshrines him in the history of baseball.
All right, before we leave the MacPhail era, in some ways, as the general manager, his legacy was more everything around the field and in business side, and obviously it's Branch Rickey that essentially makes them iconic on the field. But there is an important legacy that MacPhail has, and he turned the team called Dodger Blue. Wood is not originally Dodger Blue. Larry MacPhail brought us Dodger Blue and the script Dodger logo, which is still in use today. It's arguably as iconic now, probably as iconic as the Yankee logo.
So that's his lasting gift, right? What a parting gift. I mean, the Dodgers wouldn't be the Dodgers. At least the name wouldn't look the same.
We have so much change in our society all the time, right? The same Dodger logo in 1938 is
a slight tweak. It seems a little
but the script,
rounder than
it is
the general look,
with the swoosh and everything is basically the same. You had teams like the Atlanta Falcons that change their logo every other year. When you're as iconic, that's another reminder. If you want to be iconic, don't mess around with your logo too much.
Right. Classic. And certain things like the Coca-Cola logo, which is kind of similar. I wonder if he got the idea for it. It's
the script logo,
with the swoosh underneath. Right? I think Coca-Cola calls it the dynamic ribbon. I think is their
you're going to make me go down
trademark device.
You're going to make me go down a Coca-Cola rabbit hole. One of my favorite business books I read of all time, The Unauthorized Biography of Coca-Cola. They invented Santa Claus, Red Santa Claus.
Yeah, that's a whole other aspect of it. But the classic logos, Coca-Cola, and you could associate the Dodgers, put them in that class, but they never seem old. Some logos start to look old and outdated 100 years later, and these great logos don't.
So we transition. Larry MacPhail, World War II starts. He joins the Army. He, in some ways, rescues the business of the Dodgers, and in comes Branch Rickey.
Yeah, and Rickey comes from the St. Louis Browns, very virtuous guy, right? He'd been part of the temperance movement that led to Prohibition. He traded one future All-Star because he heard a rumor that he smoked marijuana. He actually wanted the team to go back to the bridegroom's name because he valued marriage so much that he thought, hey, we should go back to the old name of the bridegrooms from when the team had so many married players. Republican might, in this modern version of the Republican Party, might seem as an unlikely candidate for one of the great moments of desegregation in our country. But, this is closer to the Abraham Lincoln mode of the Republican Party than maybe the modern version.
And he's the builder. At the time, he arguably built the Cardinals dynasty of the Cardinals. A lot of their stardom was in those first 50 years.
Gas House Gang.
Yeah.
That era.
That's a Branch Rickey.
He played at Ohio Wesleyan in 1904 with a black teammate named Charlie Thomas. And he how did Branch Rickey become the way he did, right? And become one of the principal figures of integration in the 20th century. So their team went to South Bend to play Notre Dame, and they were told that his teammate Charlie Thomas couldn't stay at the hotel. He'd have to seek lodging elsewhere. Rickey said, well, Thomas, Charlie, you can stay in my room. So it kind of shows you that his integration of baseball was years in the making, right? It wasn't done in isolation and strictly at that moment.
And it wasn't, some people thought it was a business decision, and certainly acquiring better talent was obviously a motivation, but clearly this was more embedded in who he was.
And it's not just him, right? Like nothing happens, in a vacuum or with one individual. Martin Luther King gets a lot of credit. Like obviously there's a whole, wave movement behind him.
One of my most iconic memories of being a White House correspondent was in 2009, Barack Obama is going to throw out the first pitch at the All-Star game in St. Louis. So the way that used to work, pool duty being an Air Force One, you rotate, all the networks would rotate. It happened to be NBC's turn. So I, big-footed, our producer, I said, nope, I'm going. I want on this one. Because I'd heard we were going to pick up some special guests. And so this was, we did a stop in Detroit, and he did sort of a campaign, sort of your typical presidential talking about, I think he was pushing his, he had an economic plan then. But he picked up two gentlemen and one particular icon, gentleman by the name of Willie Mays. So we're begging Robert Gibbs, the press secretary, bring Willie Mays back to the press cabin. And he brings Willie Mays back to the press cabin. And so everybody's peppering him with questions. By the way, first guy, what was it like to hit against Koufax? It's like literally the first question of like this one. And I came up to him, I said, what's it like to be on this plane right now? And Willie just said something very simple to me. He said that it was all worth it.
Mm.
And
him not even being able to get housing in San Francisco when they moved out there.
And here he is flying on the plane. He knew exactly what I was asking. I didn't have to say, riding on Air Force One with the first black president. I just said, that's all I said. And he goes, that everything I went through was worth it.
Wow.
And it's one of the most powerful memories I have of the sort of, hey, we're so cynical as reporters, right? You're probably cynical when it comes to some of the sports guys you cover. I get cynical with politics, but that moment, and I've always thought that this is what makes the moment of Jackie Robinson and what Branch Rickey did. I mean, Branch Rickey helped set the country on a path to elect Barack Obama president.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you realize that this is what this moment means, and it might go back to a guy at Ohio Wesleyan. I mean, this is why I love doing what we're doing here.
Inspiration comes from, right?
And why we wanted to do this is that these threads all come together. This is the American story. And this is why it's so much fun to tell this.
And so the America at this time, the mid 40s, I'll go into history mode for a moment here. We're coming out of World War II, and so many black GIs who had been to other parts of the world, been to Europe, seen how they were treated there, how they weren't discriminated against. They were considered American. They weren't considered Negroes, as the term was back then. And coming back and not feeling like they wanted to accept the status quo anymore. Hey, we've experienced fairness. We've seen what it's like to be treated as a full-fledged person, human being. So it starts this animus, as you get back home and sort of this agitation and refusal to kind of go back to the way things were before they had left for the war. So that's out there. You've got the black press, sports writers like Sam Lacey and Wendell Smith, who are, encouraging baseball to integrate at its time. And you have the communist press, like the Daily Worker, who in some ways was ahead of the black press and wrote more stories calling for integration than even the black press did.
Well, what's interesting about this, and I don't, it's funny, the word communism and what it is seen as today, what people need to realize is in the 30s and 40s, the Communist Party movement in this country hadn't been frankly, the Soviet Union discredited the name.
Right.
But before the Soviet Union had fully discredited the name, many what you would call progressives today sort of affiliated with a lot of college professors. There's the Oppenheimer, the great Oppenheimer biography, the movie that the book that the movie is based on gets into this. And it's sort of like when he's all, when they're trying to go root him out, aren't you a communist sympathizer? The fact is in the 30s, and most college professors were Communist Party sympathizers because they were the only party calling for integration.
Yeah.
This is what it was about. It was the only party in American politics in the social justice movement. Now, again, the Soviet Union discredits the word down the road, which is why I think sometimes history messes this up, to be frank.
So their point at the time was that capitalism worked by fostering dissent between the black and the white workers. And they were looking to advance the workers. Communism worked it succeeded. It gained power in the United States, right, by recruiting oppressed workers, regardless of race. And here, we talk about market inefficiencies, right? So if you have an ignored group of people and you're trying to advance your cause, so appealing to black people was part of the way to strengthen communism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying, hey, we can build a movement through having the most amount of people. And they saw baseball as part of the way to broaden the appeal of communism. If we appeal to these folks,
right,
through our message that we welcome them,
mm-hmm.
We'll have a stronger movement. Another person, I talk about him in my class who was at the forefront of this, Shirley Povich, the great Washington Post sports columnist. So I actually had the privilege of working with. It's amazing. So I'm referencing a column he wrote in 1939.
It's amazing.
I worked alongside him at the Washington Post in the 1990s. Shirley Povich, who was at the Dempsey-Tunney long count in Chicago, who was at the Babe Ruth called shot game at Wrigley Field. And he says Babe Ruth did not call a shot. He was pointing at the pitcher, and calling him a lousy so-and-so. He wasn't calling a shot.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going with Shirley Povich's guy who was there. You can go with the lore, with the mythology of the called shot. Shirley Povich said he didn't call the shot.
Well, and this has been the struggle. If Jay and I have had one struggle as we do this together, it's we don't want to burst too many of your myth bubbles. But that's what happens. The more you learn, the more you learn.
So what he saw in this November 7th game, Shirley Povich and Walter Johnson, the A Train, another great Shirley Povich, he'll just drop a line like, Walter Johnson once told me. Walter Johnson told you what? But so in this case, Shirley and his buddy Walter Johnson go to a Negro League game in Orlando. It's the Homestead Grays versus Newark Eagles.
Yeah.
And Povich writes, there's a couple $1 million worth of baseball talent on the loose, ready for the big leagues, yet unsigned by any major league clubs. There are pitchers who would win 20 games this season for any big league club that offered them contracts. And there are outfielders who would hit 350, infielders who could win quick recognition as stars. Only one thing is keeping them out of the big leagues, the pigmentation of their skin. They happen to be colored. That's their crime in the eyes of big league owners. And this is Shirley Povich in 1939.
So here we are. So Branch Rickey. He signs these guys in 1945. People forget, and this was always something to me. It's interesting. We talk about 1947 and April 15th, 1947, but he does this 2 years earlier when he signs three players pretty quickly in succession: Robinson, then Don Newcombe, then Roy Campanella.
And he's very purposeful. So he tells Red Barber, the Dodger broadcaster, in 1945. I'm going to bring a Negro to the Brooklyn Dodgers. So again, it's not, like in a movie where
it's all just like happened.
Thing,
no,
right.
I mean, this was, this was carefully planned out. This was signed in 1945, integrated into the minor league system so that there was essentially, this wasn't just hurry up and expose these young men to what was going to be a very hostile environment.
And it also, I'll say helps because somebody died, but it did help the Kennison Mountain Landis, the longtime baseball commissioner who was very anti-integration.
Right.
He dies of heart disease, age 78 in 1944.
Right.
So literally over his dead body.
Not a coincidence that it's 1945. Kennesaw Mountain Landis has to die, right, for baseball to integrate in 1945. I think what's interesting is the decision why Robinson versus Campanella versus Newcombe. right? And there was always been, then there's a lot of there's a lot of mythology and lore about but ultimately, with it makes a lot of sense to me why Ricky thought Robinson was the guy to handle the moment. He was college educated. He'd gone to UCLA. He'd lived in a milder, racially polarized climate,
teams,
right? And you dug up a fun fact about, because one of the things that doesn't that gets lost is that the NFL technically integrated before Major League Baseball.
Yeah,
and there was a specific law of why this happened.
Yeah, so it also goes to speak the place of baseball over football. The reason why we think of Jackie Robinson and we think about the Dodgers moving to LA as being, this transformative moment in sports. Well, the Rams had done it earlier, right? On both counts. But baseball was just so much more important that it didn't matter as much until baseball did it. So the Rams had integrated the NFL the year before, and they moved to Los Angeles a decade before the Dodgers.
Right.
First of all, they integrated the NFL the year before Jackie Robinson joins the Dodgers. They weren't as heralded, though. You can make a case the Rams integrated because they moved to Los Angeles. So they played in the Coliseum,
right?
Which is still in use today by USC. It was publicly owned, and California had anti-segregation laws. So the Rams, in order to play in the Coliseum, had to be integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And so they signed the running back, Kenny Washington, who was Jackie's teammate at UCLA.
Yeah. So it is, and by the way, the Rams play an interesting role here too, because the Rams' initial struggle to just function as a franchise and have to travel by train is why eventually Walter O'Malley convinces the owner of the Giants to come west with him so they could have a slightly easier time creating a Major League Baseball schedule.
You talked about Jackie as, the choice and why. And so one thing that is, maybe it's kind of true, we're not bursting a bit, but August 29th of 1945, Jackie goes to the Dodgers offices and Ricky meets with him and hits him with every racist taunt he could think of. And Jackie stood up and, got a little bit contentious, but, Branch Rickey made him promise not to retaliate. If you're subjected to these types of taunts and slurs.
We got to remember, Robinson was known to have a temper, got him court-martialed in the Army in 1944. So in some ways, because of that moment, this was Ricky sort of saying, okay, and why was he court-martialed? Because he refused to go to the back of a segregated Army bus at Fort Hood, Texas. And that's why Robinson was court-martialed. So he was very principled.
Yeah.
We look back at it, that would be a heroic move, but it wasn't treated by a heroic move by our U.S. government.
So Robinson passes the test in this moment. And then October 23rd, 1945, signs the contract with the Montreal Royals. February 10th of next year, he marries Rachel, who is still with us.
Still going with us as we record.
2026. Yeah. Just an amazing, amazing woman.
What's interesting is that what's funny about Jackie Robinson, because you look at his Major League Baseball playing career and you think, oh, it was kind of a short career. But he was 28 in 1947.
Yeah.
He was actually, by the way, today, nobody would want to sign a 28-year-old. Don't give him a long-term contract. He's already past his prime. But in some ways, that extra few years of maturity, Campanella was 23 and had only had an 8th grade education. And that was something that Ricky thought he didn't want to put Campanella in that position. And Newcomb was super young. He was 19.
It's interesting because I had thought of the drawbacks, that segregation, denied the Dodgers, denied Major League Baseball, denied Jackie these opportunities. But putting it that way, that, they might have benefited just because of what they were going into, right? Being better prepared to deal with what they were about to face. They came along at the right time, right? They were born at the right time because it allowed them to face this moment at that age.
You'll like, I have one more fun fact for you, because as the sports writer of the two of us here, you'll appreciate this. So Branch Rickey was talking to various people to get advice about which black players to sign. And one guy he consulted was a gentleman by the name of Wendell Smith, who was the writer for the Black Weekly, the Pittsburgh Courier. And Bill Veeck always claimed that Wendell Smith should get credit for Jackie Robinson because he initially said that Robinson had the right combination of talent and temperament.
Yeah. So it's kind of being, I don't know, corroborated, but that's kind of become the accepted narrative of this.
Because, if you just were saying who was the best of the three, Campanella was the best player in the Negro Leagues at the time of his signing, arguably.
But a lot of people credit Wendell Smith for for making Branch Rickey aware of Jackie Robinson.
Right.
And bringing him to his attention. So the players, supposedly, the white players on the Dodgers, there was stories that they were going to sign a petition saying that they didn't want to play with him. DeRocher, the manager, was worried that he wouldn't get a World Series bonus without Jackie. So he tells them they can take their petition and wipe their asses with it. He said, "I'm the manager of this ball club and I'm interested in one thing, winning." So I guess that was the last revolt, internal revolt that gets snuffed out. And then the Dodgers make it official on April 10th. Arguably the most significant short statement. We think of great short statements like Michael Jordan, "I'm back."
Yeah.
But the exact wording was, "The Brooklyn Dodgers today purchased the contract of Jackie Roosevelt Robinson from the Montreal Royals. He will report immediately."
There you go.
And with that,
baseball is changed forever on that front. Jackie Robinson was never comfortable with the position he was put in, was he? If you believe his memoir.
Although he accepted it, though. He did wear it. It was hard. Like it's hard to dispute or counter the notion that going through this led to his early termination. Look at the constitution of his wife, Rachel.
She, in some ways, is in, and it's remarkable to me. I mean, I'm confessing my age. Jackie Robinson died the year I was born, 1972. And here's Rachel Robinson, and who's been alive longer, and has been Mrs. Jackie Robinson. She's had to be this identity.
Yeah.
And that's not, that's not a choice. That's just sort of in some ways thrust upon her. Yeah. But she has been, in some ways, she's helped, I think, just magnify the legacy.
And magnify is a great word because she's magnificent and regal. And
I had the privilege of interviewing her once on Meet the Press with Ken Burns when they were doing that updated version of baseball, and they had updated it.
Yeah, she's just majestic when you see her in the room with you.
There's this feeling. It's almost like a grande dame. Like it's just like, please part ways, and I don't want to say the word diva to make it sound like a negative. Right. More of in the no. She is. There's a feeling of royalty.
One thing with Rachel, while we're on here, going forward, the legacy of Jackie, it was interesting. So it became somewhat ironic as Jackie Robinson Day was celebrated and Bud Selig, and one of the great things he did in his tenure as commissioner, retiring Jackie's number throughout baseball and having everyone on April 15th, all players throughout baseball wear number 42. And the sad part, though, was that there were some years in which the Dodgers didn't have any black players on the roster as they celebrated Jackie Robinson Day. That's always stuck with me that, we can celebrate, the globalization of the game. And as we take this, we're just coming off the fantastic, World Baseball Classic. And we see how much the sport matters in so many places and how many people are getting the chance to play, regardless of their background.
Right.
But let's not forget what Jackie Robinson fought for. The opportunities for black players had been denied until he came around, and what he had to endure to keep the door open for black players to follow.
No, it's been interesting as baseball came back to Washington, and Washington is a largely African American city, and to see, I always say Washington and LA and New York, and there's only a handful of cities where the fan base is as diverse as the players on the field, and you see that. And the Nationals have done a pretty good job of James Wood, C.J. Abrams. They're one of the few teams that have multiple African American players starting, but it is still something that's in the single digits percentage wise, and it's it really bothers baseball. Have you noticed that? Baseball's leaders, it's not something they're comfortable about.
It's kind of interesting, we think of this moment. We
Right.
celebrate now, April 15th, 1947, 6,000 empty seats at Ebbets Field. Little mention of Jackie Robinson in the New York Times. I've called up the column and showed it to my classes before. Like it's like the 20th paragraph from the columnist. Or
another plane lands safely at an airport or something is how they treated it?
Yeah, just basically like, the Negro player did okay and, it didn't seem to be much of an issue. Fortunately, Sam Lacey was there from the Baltimore Afro-American, and he actually rides home with Jackie.
He gets the only interview, right?
Yeah, the only interview. So, the black sports writers weren't allowed in the clubhouse. The clubhouse is still segregated to the press,
in 1947.
And the white writers weren't that interested. Well, first of all, they didn't really go in the clubhouse a lot then anyway and do quotes from players. That kind of comes along later in the 50s and 60s. But Sam Lacey rides home with them, and basically Jackie's thoughts is, he says, that went along swell. And he's very pleased that there weren't that many issues with his teammates. And I think he was bracing for some, but he's just kind of satisfied and relieved. And thank goodness for Sam Lacey that we have this, really the only things that we hear from Jackie on that day, on this historic day, are in the car ride home.
Let me throw something at you. Does Pee Wee Reese get in the Hall of Fame without that moment with Jackie?
So, Jonathan Ieg, who wrote the book Opening Day about Jackie's rookie season, is adamant about it. And it was kind of debunked that the moment to which you reference is Pee Wee Reese, they're getting all kinds of catcalls and boos and things in Cincinnati, I believe, is where it's supposed to have taken place.
Right.
And that Pee Wee Reese goes over and puts his arm around Jackie Robinson. There's no contemporary accounting for that in all the writing of that season. There might have been a moment that happened later.
Well, Reese confirms the moment. He told Roger Kahn, he said, I was just trying to make the world a little bit better. That's what you're supposed to do with your life, isn't it? And Rachel Robinson is quoted as saying, I thought it was a very supportive gesture and very instinctive of Pee Wee's part. You shouldn't forget that Pee Wee was the captain. He led the way. Pee Wee was more than a friend. Pee Wee was a good man. And that's Rachel Robinson.
But if it did happen, it didn't happen that day.
It may be that day.
There might have been a moment that happened later and it wasn't quite as dramatic. But Jonathan Ieg, Pulitzer Prize winning biographer of Martin Luther King, wrote biographies of Ali in addition to Jackie Robinson. He insists that it didn't happen as the way it's gone down. And
right. And
we like to have these Hollywood moments, right? We like to tell ourselves these stories.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always play. Like, one of the reasons, so for the book, Rachel kind of pushes back on it. It's interesting. Both Jackie and Rachel kind of came around to it. Pee Wee Reese kind of...
Well, because it seems like they all wanted, and clearly Pee Wee Reese played that role.
Yeah.
Generally.
Right.
He was the team captain. He made it clear, hey, I'm okay, so you better be okay.
Right.
So there's no doubt that Rachel and Jackie are forever grateful that Pee Wee Reese played a leadership role.
Right.
Whether it was that moment, it is not.
They even made a statue of it, I think.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Well, here's what Jackie wrote in his own memoir. This is a good quote. He wrote about a similar incident. It wasn't in the Cincinnati in 47. He writes about an incident in Boston,
yes.
in 48. And he says, in Boston, during a period when the heckling pressure seemed unbearable, some of the players began to heckle Reese. They were writing him about being a Southerner and playing ball with a black man. Pee Wee didn't answer them. Without a glance in their direction, he left his position, walked over to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and began talking to me. His words weren't important. I don't even remember what he said. It was the gesture of comradeship and support that counted. So the point was, the Robinsons clearly knew that Pee Wee was in their corner and he wasn't going to do this. But he grew up in Kentucky, which Kentucky border state has its...
there were a lot of Southern players. They're the Brooklyn Dodgers, but a lot of their players came from the South. And, not all of them were as welcoming to Jackie.
And it is worth, Pee Wee Reese never signed the petition to say when there were some players circulating a petition saying that they wouldn't play with Robinson if he was called up. Pee Wee refused to sign it. So regardless of the legend, this is a case where maybe the story itself isn't true, but the spirit is factually true.
the Dodgers win the pennant that year. They lost to the Yankees in the World Series, which
This really arguably begins the legend that is the Dodgers-Yankees rivalry. Wouldn't you say? That that in some ways, 40, right? It like all
they're more of a legit rival to them
because it's finally the Dodgers actually weren't that successful of a franchise really until they had a couple of pennants here or there, but 47 is arguably the beginning of their march towards dynasticism.
Jackie helps the National League attendance average 1.3 million per team that year, which was a record. So not only the Dodgers had 20,000 additional tickets sold. That was 10% of the boost that year. But obviously, we go on the road and black people around the country would, to the extent that baseball
that they were allowed to,
and to the extent that they could come, they couldn't sit everywhere in the ballpark for sure. But they, it was box office too.
The 1950s Dodgers. First of all, Campanella wins 3 MVPs in 5 years. It feels like, and then of course, like the next big moment in Dodger history is the loss of Campanella, arguably.
Yeah. Before the loss, though, there's a great victory in 1955, right?
And that's what makes it so much harder, right? At 55, by the way, I love this. He was, remember there was about 10 years, it seemed like the Giants only could win in even numbered years. Well, Campanella only won MVPs in odd numbered years, 51, 53, and 55. I don't know why not 50, 52, 54, not so good, but 51, 53, 55, he wins the MVPs. And 55 is the one they finally break through.
They finally break through and win. Johnny Padres, the winning pitcher in the championship clinching game. What's interesting, my link to that came kind of decades later. So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who grew up in Harlem, was a Dodger fan, as most black fans were, regardless of where you live, right? Black people rooted for the Dodgers.
Right.
Big Dodger fan from their time in New York. And so the Lakers in 1985, so 30 years later, weird to think of it seems like a short time now to come back, but 30 years later, they finally beat the Celtics for the first time in franchise history. Remember Kareem saying he felt like Johnny Padre, beating the Yankees.
Because he's an old, he was, grew up in New York City.
Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting reference for a basketball player in 1985 to look back to 1955 and the Dodgers. But it just showed you kind of the enduring impact of that moment. And, the moment that the underdogs come out on top.
And that's their reputation. I will admit, but the Dodgers being the king of baseball over the last few years is so weird to me, because the entire identity of the Dodgers has always been the underdog, the other burrow, the outsider, the bums, right? They've always been the, and they couldn't buy their way in. They weren't the rich guys. They were the working class guys, And so it is sort of strange for me that now they're the rich guys. They're new money, if you will. Walter O'Malley. In many ways, he's probably, he's another one here. You've got we had Larry MacPhail, you have Branch Rickey, and then you have Walter O'Malley. And Walter O'Malley, what's interesting about him is that he joins the Dodgers just simply as legal counsel.
Yeah, he works with the Brooklyn Trust Company, which handled a lot of the Dodgers financing. And he finds out that the McKeever family wants to sell their shares in the team because they notified the team lawyer. He's the team lawyer. And he winds up buying, instead, though, the more valuable share, the Ebbets shares, for $1 million in the mid-40s. There's a great what if in the book Forever Blue about the Dodgers that Joseph Kennedy, scion of the Kennedy family, had considered buying a share of the Dodgers for $1.3 million and installing his son, Jack Kennedy, as the president of the team.
How about that?
So there's
move over George W. Bush.
Yeah.
Jack Kennedy could have been the first baseball man turned president.
And maybe he doesn't go into politics. All those things. That's a pivotal moment in the history of the country, right?
Well, what's interesting also is that he kind of outmaneuvers Branch Rickey. They're partners at first. Yeah. But Branch Rickey, at the end of the day, cared about baseball. Walter O'Malley was a businessman.
And there's a power struggle. And so O'Malley winds up buying him out. And then after that, he makes it clear that in order to work for the Dodgers, you have to swear personal allegiance to him. So all the Rickey loyalists would have to go. And then Ricky gets hired to run the Pittsburgh organization, and a number of his people and scouts, and front office people, they leave Brooklyn to join him. The ones who stayed, three notable ones stayed with O'Malley: Buzzy Bavasi, Fresco Thompson, and Al Campanis.
Yeah.
Bavasi and Campanis in particular, names that kind of stayed with the Dodgers and resonate for decades.
Not to sort of go to the end before we go to the beginning of the sort of the move to LA. Spoiler alert, the Dodgers end up moving to LA here. But my favorite little nugget from Buzzy Bavasi is that so they took a vote in the Dodger organization about doing the move. It was 8-1 against moving, but there was one vote that mattered the most. Let's just say it was Walter O'Malley's vote. But what's interesting is how, look, O'Malley understood that, and to me, this is what gets to our theme of barrier breakers. Like, okay, he was like, how do I find more revenue?
Right.
And he saw the stadium as key to more revenue. He'd love parking revenue. At first he was trying to figure out how can he reconstruct Ebbets Field? How could he find a way to, find more parking or find new ways? Because we were seeing the suburbanization right after World War II. There was this suburbanization.
Yeah, it's a changing Brooklyn in the 50s now. Post-war, the white Brooklynites are moving further out. So they're losing the core of their fan base. The Brooklyn Navy shipbuilding yard, which should, peak during the war effort, that's down. Literally by 51, the Flatbush trolley that ran by Ebbets Field, the one that helped give the team the nickname, stopped running. So how can you even be the Brooklyn Dodgers anymore? And Ebbets Field is, starting to fall apart.
And arguably, so this is where, and this is frankly why you and I joined forces, right? I'm coming at it in some ways as a political history buff. This is the debate. Who lost the Brooklyn Dodgers? Do you blame Robert Moses? Do you blame Walter O'Malley? And I am sort of the mindset that in some ways they just had two different visions of what American city life was going to look like. O'Malley assumed he wanted a stadium that was urban. He wanted a stadium that was, frankly, available on public transportation.
Close to the Long Island Railroad.
Right. And Moses assumed that the car was going to, look, this is why he built all those horrible highways that exist now to this day, but he assumed everything was going to be suburbanization, which is why he rejected every idea that Walter O'Malley had for either building a new stadium or expanding in Brooklyn. He desperately wanted to move the Dodgers to Queens.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic that Dodger Stadium in LA becomes like a shrine to the automobile culture of the 50s, right?
When O'Malley actually was this guy. When we think about our debates today about suburbanization versus urbanization and, how reliant are we on the car, it is ironic that the owner, the guy that was on the side of, no, we should make it available for public transportation, goes to the least friendly public transportation community in America.
Well, it's interesting. The book Forever Blue that I've cited a lot, it's pretty favorable to O'Malley. It takes the stance that O'Malley did everything he could to try to keep the Dodgers, that he was interested, that, even while he's like flying to LA for meetings in LA, he's like still advocating to keep the team in Brooklyn.
Now we should talk about the fact that LA wanted a team. LA was shopping for a team. And there was there was a time, I think the Dodgers were the only team making money in the National League at one point in the 50s. Baseball was not making money. And you had the St. Louis Browns move to Baltimore. You have the Boston Braves move to Milwaukee. There's everybody's searching for new revenue, and it wasn't the way moves are driven today over stadium arguments.
Also,
it was simply
expansion wasn't an option.
Not yet.
Yeah, they weren't really thinking in terms of expanding. And you had a glut, right? You had 3 teams in New York. You had 2 teams in Philadelphia, 2 teams in Boston, 2 teams in Chicago, 2 teams in St. Louis.
It was an East Coast. It was a very, very sort of dominant.
So moving teams kind of made sense if you think about it that way.
What if O'Malley and Moses continue to negotiate and the New York Giants moved to LA? Because the New York Giants, look, the Dodgers were making money. They had a devoted fan base. They were making money. The Giants were not. The Polo Grounds was as bad a shape as Ebbets Field was. The Polo Grounds were worse. Their ownership, he was looking at Minneapolis. He was looking all around. He could have easily ended up in LA at first, or before the Dodgers end up making.
So you talk about how it was more driven by the LA people wanting the Dodgers to move more than O'Malley wanting out of New York. Like, talk about how he kind of had a lot of different options and interests that he had, things he wanted to do in New York. But one of the people behind this was Vincent X. Flaherty, the LA Examiner columnist, who was writing letters to O'Malley. So not only was he writing about it, out there, but he was writing to O'Malley trying to convince him to move the team or to sell the team to someone who would move them to LA. Kind of reminds me of like, he was with the LA Examiner, but like the LA Times, kind of in bed with Mulholland, the developer who eventually led to the annexation of the San Fernando Valley, water wars, and it's kind of fictionalized in the movie Chinatown. This caused me to go down a Chinatown rabbit hole while I was doing the research for this, but the notion of a newspaper columnist as a real advocate, like, his name pops up a lot in this. Flaherty is just like really, really pushing, he had connections with the politicians, and he was really pushing O'Malley to move the Dodgers out to LA.
My favorite little nuggets, basically, thanks, by the way, to that reporting. There's this great website, waltero'malley.com, that Vincent Flaherty's work is featured in. But there's a few little fun facts here that any Dodger fan should know, and I didn't know this, that O'Malley actually had to purchase the rights, essentially, to LA from the Chicago Cubs and Philip Wrigley
Field,
because there was a Wrigley Field in LA, and he kind of had a minor league team. So there's this great story, according to Flaherty, that they're at the it's February 3rd in 57, the New York Baseball Writers Dinner at the Astor Hotel. And O'Malley scribbles on the back of an envelope to Philip Wrigley. And he says, "How much will you take for the LA Angels and Wrigley Field?" Wrigley writes back, $2 million for the real estate and ballpark and $1 million for the franchise. There you go. Wow. That's how business was done in New York City, 1957. He finally signs the deal with LA's negotiator in August of 57, just technically 2 days after the Giants announced that they're moving to San Francisco. But it was the National League owners vote unanimously in May of 57 to allow both the Dodgers and the Giants to basically give them permission to move. But it was O'Malley that convinced the Giants owner, Horace Stoneham, who was going to go to Minneapolis, to instead, no, come out west with me. And again, it goes back, why I wanted to bring up that LA Rams moment. It goes back to the frustration the Rams had in trying to, literally the closest franchise to the Rams in the NFL in 1946 was the Chicago Cardinals,
How much of this do you put on Robert Moses? Who had a lot of power. It's interesting because he wasn't an elected official.
He's the most powerful, basically, arguably the most powerful unelected official in the 20th century politics, right? And how he chooses to design cities and the whole highway culture. In some ways, you could argue that it actually influences the interstate highway system too. The theories of basically cities are pass-throughs for the suburbs. And look, I have acquired a negative view of Mr. Moses. So I am inclined to his vision of the city turned out to be wrong. I mean, if you think about what New York City is today, it is not this suburban. So his theory of the case was wrong. But to me, the move west was inevitable for America. Let alone, right? Like, so if it's not the Dodgers, somebody else goes. This doesn't, like, the move west was going to happen.
Just like baseball was going to integrate.
Yes, it was going to happen. Somebody had to be first.
Right.
And if it wasn't the Dodgers, it might have been, for all we know, it might have been the Milwaukee Braves that end up over there. Or, I don't think we fully appreciate that there was a huge demand out west to essentially link, to get the culture of the East to come out west.
So there was a Brooklyn Sports Authority that had been formed to try to, come up with stadium solutions. The Dodgers, remember, they're playing in the smallest stadium in National League, 32,000.
Well, Robert Moses said no to every single Brooklyn. He just did not believe in Brooklyn. That's the story. And I think that's where I will I fall on the side of it's Moses' fault.
And he wanted Queens, which is eventually where the Mets wound up.
It's where Shea Stadium ends up. I mean, because he saw Queens as the gateway to Westchester County and the gateway to Long Island. And he assumed that that's where, and by the way, that's who the Mets are. They are arguably the suburban New York team, and the Yankees are the urban New York team.
You know, they're not physically that far.
And that's,
Of course, the Mets colors made up of the blue for the Dodgers and the orange for the Giants.
Yeah.
Combining the Mets colors for the two departed teams to make up for that. So,
all right, so we go to LA.
A little bit of foreshadowing.
Do we want to leave Brooklyn? Are we ready to leave Brooklyn?
Yeah, we can get ready to leave Brooklyn. O'Malley went on a trip with the Dodgers in Japan. Came back, there's no progress. He goes out to LA to look for a new plane for the Dodgers. Again, they're earlier. He goes up to LA. Flaherty drives him around, including a tour of Chavez Ravine, which was the proposed spot for a stadium. Right, it's near two different freeways and two wide boulevards. The LA mayor, Mayor Polson, had opposed public housing. He considered it socialist. So, communism, socialism helps integrate baseball. But now, well after the war, well into,
Chavez Ravine was supposed to be public housing.
Yeah.
And he kills it.
Because he considers it socialism. And he's anti-socialism. So there was a 3,300 unit project proposed for Chavez Ravine. And so he spikes that project, which leaves the area open for the Dodgers. And so there's a lot of kind of blowback and negativity toward the Dodgers for, what wound up happening, like
particularly with Mexican Americans.
Yeah, because houses are bulldozed. There's pictures, literally, people being dragged out of their houses. Right?
This is there's this LA County. So there were only 20 families remaining living in Chavez Ravine by 1959, and literally the forcible eviction was on television. It's known as Black Friday. Furniture hauled onto the street. News cameras were filming this. So it is one of these black eyes on the Dodgers. And the question is, so we go to, who do you blame, O'Malley or Moses for Brooklyn? How much blame do the Dodgers get for Chavez Ravine? From the O'Malley point of view, he didn't really know the history of this. He saw it as a map. He's
only been to LA a couple of times.
Right. But there was such steep opposition because, first of all, this is what makes this deal, I think, so important, because arguably what the deal the Dodgers end up getting from the city then, frankly, becomes what every owner hopes to get from a city going forward. Basically, free land, tax-free for a period of time. Here's this. So here was the deal that O'Malley got at the time, and this had never happened before. He gets a city contract. He has to privately finance, build, and maintain a 50,000-seat stadium. He has to pay $500,000 to develop a youth rec center, $60,000 annually for 20 years. And he has to put the land on the property tax rolls beginning at $345,000 in 1962, all in exchange for roughly 300 acres. But this was valued at about a little over $2 million. I mean, in those dollars, which was a big deal. So essentially, it's what you've seen many today. This is commonplace, right? The sports owner and the city, they're negotiating, can we get the land tax-free? Can we own the land? Whatever it is, or you get a $1 lease if the city owns the land. But in many ways, this is the origin story of what now is commonplace in sports franchises.
Well, another side note of this, you talked about how, the Angels and Wrigley Field out there, the Los Angeles Angels. So yeah, the Dodgers purchased them in order to get the territorial rights to LA, to precede all this stuff. But something else that came with that was they got the logo. So the interlocking LA, which has become
originally the Angels logo, right?
Yeah, it was the LA Angels, and the Dodgers adopted that. So that when they came out west.
So, I mean, talk about stepbrother syndrome if you're the Angels. Like, this has been a constant. The Dodgers are a constant thorn in the side of the. They steal their logo. 70 years later, they steal the most important player of the 21st century in baseball, and Shohei Ohtani. I mean, if I were a longtime Angels fan, my hatred for the Dodgers would be at levels that would be.
What's interesting? It wasn't that much of a rivalry, though.
Never has been.
Out there.
I know, nobody
most
cared.
of me and my friends, we were fans of the Dodgers and the Angels.
Right?
It's sad but true. Interleague play changed that a little bit. But when they never used to play each other, you could be a fan of both. Like, it didn't interfere at all. I think, there started to be some resentment. And then, when the Angels rebranded themselves as the Los Angeles Angels, that didn't go over very well. What was interesting was that they kind of the final straw was that the fans weren't coming out to support in Brooklyn still. But yeah, Flaherty really, really is behind this. There's a unanimous vote to let the Dodgers so there's no resistance, coming from the league.
Because they all know they're all having these financial troubles. I mean, this is the dirty little secret, right? That's why it was so important to remind people. The 50s are seen as this golden age of baseball. And as a business, it was anything but.
So the interesting thing is that there's the go-ahead, right, to come to LA, but it's still not secured.
Well, they start playing in the LA Coliseum.
Right.
So they have, first of all, every attendance record in baseball is still owned by the Dodgers in the LA Coliseum days, right?
Yeah.
Like 90,000 to see this, 90,000 to see that. Right.
They had to, there was pushback. There was challenge to the deal that had been arranged. So there's actually a referendum on the ballot for June of '58 challenging this whole deal that's in place. And they wound up having a funding telecast. In true LA fashion, they have a telethon to promote the passage of it.
The Dodger-thon on KTTV. It is a who's who of Hollywood of the 1950s.
Jerry Lewis, Debbie Reynolds, Dean Martin, George Burns, Jack Benny. A 5-hour broadcast.
And wait, you left out one. Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan was on it. Wow.
Ronald Reagan as well.
They get lobbied in favor of by Bob Cobb, who's the owner of the famed Brown Derby restaurant. So voter sentiment was against the stadium, actually, before the telethon, per the polling and reporting at that time. But thanks in part to the telethon, 62% voter turnout.
It was the largest non-presidential election turnout in LA history at the time. By the way, you talked to LA had to change when they hold mayor's races because nobody was voting in them these days, right? But back then, this was some serious interest in the community. They cared about this issue, and it passes literally by 25,000 votes. A turnout of over 600,000 people came, 3 percentage points.
Yeah.
And by the way, not uncommon. Look, arguably, this tension about do you use public funds to do this? And this goes back, you go back to the debate about Moses versus O'Malley. I will say I take Moses' side on one issue, which is the stadium is a public good. Who does the stadium belong to? Is the stadium belong to the public? Does the stadium belong to the franchise? And I think Moses ultimately believed it should be a public facility that a private group paid to have access to, versus I think O'Malley said, no, it's
privately financed. He was very proud of the fact that this was the first privately financed stadium since Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium in, I think, 1923.
Right.
And so, that WalterO'Malley.com website, it points that out very, very pridefully. But first, they're in the Coliseum. Like you said, 70,000 come out to watch their first game against the Giants. When they're playing against the White Sox in the World Series in 1959, more than 90,000 people come out. You have oval, so traditional kind of track. Remember, there used to be a track around it because it was built for the Olympics.
Right.
So there's oval track-shaped football primary stadium. They had to configure it into a baseball diamond. They had right-handed power hitters in their rosters, so they made the left field the closer one. Dodger Stadium gets passed. It opens in 1962 at a cost of $23 million. What's interesting, it's the oldest modern stadium, and it's the newest old stadium.
Yeah.
It's the third oldest stadium in the big leagues right now. Fenway Park, 1912, Wrigley Field, 1914 are the only two that are older.
Now, here's a fun, I'm going to hit you with a trivia question right now. So the Dodgers, so Wrigley Field and the Dodgers are the two oldest stadiums in the National League. What's third?
Third after that.
Because it actually only underscores your point. The third oldest, no, it's Coors Field. The third oldest stadium in the National League now is actually Coors Field. And it's just shows
Colorado,
you in Denver, Colorado, which opened in the early 90s. But that is how much the stadiums have turned over. You now have, and that's why the Dodgers Stadium, it's funny, you're right about it. It still feels modern. It's considered one of the first new stadiums. And it is now a bridge between the old and what is today's modern ballpark.
So it's fortuitous because it's built before the rise of the multi-purpose stadiums in the 60s and 70s. That's one of the reasons it's aged so well. So later, you get these stadiums that are designed to accommodate both football and baseball, and it winds up being bad for both.
Right.
And this didn't have that
horrible
issue.
Stadiums. When you're right. I remember first time I moved to DC in 1990. And first time I go to RFK.
Which was the first of these multi-purpose stadiums.
Correct. And I realized, and I'd already been to Veterans and I'd been to Shea, and you're like, good God, these stadiums are terrible. And Bush was this way. There was a version of St. Louis had one, Cincinnati had one, Pittsburgh had one, Philadelphia had one, the Shea Stadium. And they were just, Fulton County Stadium was this. They were terrible.
In Atlanta.
They were terrible.
So Candlestick Park gets redesigned and Anaheim Stadium gets reconfigured to accommodate both.
And one of the keys, and the Royals, I think, too. Had to be
no, they were separate.
Oh, no, they were separate.
They were separate.
Yeah.
So they're kind of
No,
more
it's the
modern.
Angels one that was the right. Yeah.
Oakland, right? But
Oakland
the Raiders
was another one.
Yeah, it was terrible. Actually, it was the last of these to still be used.
It was the last one
when the A's and the Raiders were still there. Right. One of the keys of Dodger Stadium was the club level, because that allowed it to be converted to luxury suites in the 90s. Mm-hmm. So, one reason some of those old stadiums got so outdated is everyone went toward luxury seats and premium seating, and you just couldn't accommodate those in the old, like Qualcomm, another one. San Diego, Jack Murphy Stadium, as it was named for a while after the great sports writer out there.
The only stadium after a sports writer. Very important to us reporters.
It was just hard to adapt these, but Dodger Stadium adjusted very well. Wrigley Field actually adjusted well. They put the suites in there and it fit in pretty well.
And even Fenway with what they've done with the seats over the
I love the fact that Dodger Stadium still looks the same. So I was watching there's a DVD that had some of the early Dodgers World Series just highlight films. And you watch it, and you're watching Sandy Koufax pitch in the 1960s, and it's the same setting that we saw Shohei Ohtani pitch, currently.
The only real difference is that they didn't have the two scoreboards, I believe. Right? They only had one for the longest time.
And then, so when we talk about, the Dodgers being innovators, so really the first stadium, certainly in baseball, the first stadium big screen was Dodger Stadium. In 1980, they got it. They were hosting the All-Star game that year. And it's funny because it was called Diamond Vision. I always thought it was called Diamond Vision because you were looking at the baseball diamond.
Sure.
It was actually called Diamond Vision because it was built by Mitsubishi, which, their logo was the diamond.
Was the diamond.
And so it was Diamond Vision. Same as how, everyone refers to the scoreboards now as the Jumbotrons. That was because Sony built the Jumbotron. They had the Trinitron was their television back then. The stadium version of that they built was the Jumbotron. The Jumbotron kind of won out over Mitsubishi, although Mitsubishi built the Cowboy Stadium, the giant. That was actually Mitsubishi too.
The first one.
Yeah.
Texas.
No.
Oh, the one here.
The big one now, the Jerry World, which is now AT&T Stadium. Mitsubishi built that. But the Sony Jumbotron kind of became the generic name for these stadium scoreboards.
Yeah.
But the original one, the first that we've seen in these stadiums, was the Dodger Stadium in 1980.
And this gets into this incredible, sort of tapestry for the Dodgers, right? That they still have this identity that's in Brooklyn. The B still matters so much. And yet Dodger Stadium,
iconic.
It is now iconic. And in fact, you don't hear Ebbets Field the way you used to. Even now, I feel like Dodger Stadium has somehow pivoted from being seen as just a modern thing to it has in itself, it's now a landmark. All right, so forgive my dad pun here, J.A., but there are two important Brooklyn bridges to L.A. Really? Grown? All right. Come on. Come on. We had to have, all right, but there had to be this. And if we didn't have them, and one is on the field and one is off the field. One is a wild left-hander who in some ways probably would have become an icon and still is an icon in Brooklyn. And it's so funny to me how important this person is to Brooklyn natives like Larry King back in the day when he never had success in Brooklyn. And that's Sandy Koufax.
Yeah, and he remains just this iconic who is still with us and is just such a revered figure. So, he was before my time. His heyday was in the 1960s. And, but every time he would show up at Dodger Stadium for anything, just people would just fawn over. The whole stadium went crazy over. You could tell dads pointing to their kids. That's Sandy Koufax.
Well, it's sort of like, and it's the same thing of the way Willie Mays and Hank Aaron were later in life too, because you're like, they've touched history, right? You're like, wait a minute, you're the connection to Jackie, and you're the connection to this. You know, it's right there.
So the other bridge would be
the voice of the Dodgers.
Pull up a chair, Vin Scully, who takes over for Red Barber while they're still in Brooklyn, and proceeds to become the voice of the Dodgers for generations up until he retires in 2016, following the 2016 season. And it's so important. A bit of fortuitous timing that as the Dodgers come to LA, it's the late 50s, right after the invention of the transistor radio.
Right.
And so now radio is portable, easily portable. So you can listen to Vin Scully at the beach. You can listen to him at the stadium.
Or, more importantly, you can listen to him when you're stuck in traffic.
As the car became a big part of it. But the Dodgers fans really popularized listening to the game because they wanted the best of both worlds. You want to go to the game, but you don't want to miss out on hearing Vin Scully. That's how much he meant to people, and that's how much authority that he brought. Yeah. So he instantly legitimized the Dodgers. It also helped that they were really good. They win the World Series their second year out there. I don't know if this was cause or effect that you have to win in LA, but the Dodgers winning in their second year in LA.
And that is a fascinating thing. What if the Dodgers don't win right away? What if they're the Mets? Which has a decade of just laughable play until they become the Miracle Mets, right? In that first decade.
Well, it was such a big thing. They were the only show in town. Everyone talks about, you got to compete with somebody.
That matters. Yeah. That matters. I mean, the Rams were there, but they weren't. Look, we go back. Even in the 60s, the NFL wasn't the NFL yet.
And then the Raiders, the Lakers come out. And
they moved there right after the Dodgers, right?
After the Dodgers, right. Yeah. So they're in the 60s. It's funny, we talk about winning right away. The Raiders come in the mid-'80s, and they win the Super Bowl right away, which helped. And to this day, just quick diversion, people still love the Raiders in L.A. I used to get asked all the time when I was the columnist at the L.A. Times, when are the Raiders coming over? When are the Raiders coming back? Even though they left,
don't get me started on that ridiculous LA football situation, because to this day, I think the two most popular teams in LA, only one of them's in LA. Right, the Rams, and the other one is now in Las Vegas.
Yeah,
right, and the Raiders being in Vegas actually has only amplified a little bit of that old LA.
Absolutely.
But winning right away, the Dodgers, if you think about it, it's not just they win right away in the 60s and 70s. I mean, they're just constantly in contention.
And what's interesting is that they're winning and they're popular with a pretty black lineup. This is the 1960s, certainly the attendance, but again, those old World Series DVDs, I said, you see some black people in the crowd at the Coliseum and at Dodger Stadium when they're there, but you've got Jim Gilliam, you've got Tommy Davis, you've got Willie Davis, and you have Maury Wills, who is another person that puts the Dodgers at the forefront once again. In this case, it's the kind of the
innovation,
the innovation and of speed and the stolen base. And I'm not going to say the reinvention, I'd say, because Ty Cobb, you look back in the days, was still a lot of bases, but it kind of fell out of vogue.
I will make a confession. Look, as a kid being a Dodger fan, you get, you got a father who brainwashes you in Dodgers, and you learn all this sort of mythologies, and some of the myths are true, right? Jackie Robinson stealing home. And that it is like, it's almost the first on-field story as a kid that I learned was about Jackie Robinson stealing home in the World Series, which to me is still the most famous. I would argue it's the most famous stolen base in baseball history.
Easily. The only one that rivals it is Dave Roberts' steal against the Yankees that started when
he was a Red Sox.
For the Red Sox and down 3-0. Yeah. Former Dodger, and now
But in that moment, you didn't know that was a famous stolen base.
Right.
When you steal home in the World Series, and the picture is Yogi Berra trying to tag out Jackie Robinson,
stomping around after he doesn't get the call.
Right.
But Maury Wills doesn't have a singularly iconic stolen base like that, but he steals 104 bases in 1962.
Wins the MVP.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. This is a guy, we don't give MVPs to people that only steal bases very often.
And, so it's kind of, it's at the same time Luis Aparicio and Lou Brock, and then of course I think it.
Well, this
paved
is
the
the
way for
era.
Ricky Henderson.
This is the era of baseball when, I mean, I always loved looking, when I was a kid and being a Dodger fan, they didn't win until 81. And so all they did was lose World Series in the 70s. And I'd have to look up those 60s World Series and you'd see, they were so low scoring.
Yeah.
The Dodgers were basically speed, pitching, and defense.
Yeah. And Koufax, not only obviously his greatness on the field. Well, one last thing on Wills, Dave Roberts would bring him back to talk about base stealing and have him in like spring training to teach.
Well, now that base stealing is back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Koufax, I don't want to omit the fact that he was a leader in the baseball labor movement, right? Which really comes to the forefront in the 1970s and Kirk Flood and Marvin Miller. But, Koufax and his partner Don Drysdale, his fellow pitcher.
They were going to hold out together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For, I think they were seeking $100,000 each, like the astronomical sum of $100,000. But, they said, hey, strength in numbers and the two of us.
Yeah. What
are the Dodgers without the two of us? So we'll give Koufax credit there. And of course, the iconic moment, the conviction of not pitching in the World Series.
Because of religious beliefs. And look, for young Jewish kids, that was Koufax is this
Jackie
icon in way.
In some ways.
Yeah,
right?
it is. And I don't use the comparison because I don't want to. It's not the same. But it is. It's
to have the moment, to have the person that you can
it gives
look
you
up
identity.
To. Right.
Yeah. We all are searching for identity, right? And it is an important identity, and it still is to this day to the Jewish community. I mean, Koufax is this. He is, there's Moses and there's Sandy. Okay, I mean, and you can argue about everybody else in between, but that's, there you go. Right?
Jewish Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, there's your Jewish Mount. We're only going to put Moses and Sandy on there. Everybody else is going to have to get out of the way. But that's, this is it. It is. They really do. They win 2 World Series in the 60s. They get to 3 in the 70s. And, the 70s, they become, I feel like the reputation of the Dodgers was they were always the great pitching team. And I guess you have to say that, do you start with Newcomb, right? Then you get Koufax and Drysdale. Then it comes
Newcomb, the first Cy Young Award winner.
Right. First ever for the Dodgers, right? And so you get Newcomb does that. You have Koufax and Drysdale. Goes right into Don Sutton,
right?
Bob Welch. These were
Roy Stevens.
Yeah.
But the 70s really become known for that iconic infield.
Yes.
So, Steve Garvey, Davey Lopes, Bill Russell is short, Ron Say at third base.
And by the way, maybe the greatest nickname in baseball. There's 2. I love nicknames, but the Penguin. I mean, that's such a great name. My only other favorite one was Mike Hargrove. He had the nickname the Human Rain Delay because of how often he took him before he got ready for an at-bat. That might be my favorite, but Penguin's pretty close.
Penguin is pretty cool. But, they come up and they just anchor that team forever, and that stability. And also at a time when baseball is starting to become unstable.
With the free agency.
You have free agency.
Yeah.
You've got Reggie Jackson going from Oakland to Baltimore to the Yankees.
Right.
And the Dodgers just become this pillar of stability throughout the 70s, year in, year out, game in, game out.
Speaking of barrier breakers, by the way, speaking of barrier breakers, the Dodgers have the first ever relief pitcher win a Cy Young in 74 with Mike Marshall.
Wow. So, and then those back-to-back World Series against the Yankees. And that's kind of where my interest in baseball and fandom begins. We're actually
so I was brought. I
77. Go back to LA in 78.
I was 5. For when Reggie Jackson cheated in the World Series. I mean, when Reggie Jackson ducked the tag in the World Series. But I pretend I remember the moment myself. But what I really remember was my father yelling at the TV, "No, he's out!" When Reggie Jackson gets out of the way of that tag. I think it's in game. Is it game? I can't.
I don't remember watching it. You have the iconic.
What I remember is my dad yelling about it.
The 3 swings, 3 at-bats, 3 homers.
Oh, with
Reggie.
Welch. Yeah. Or how about Bob Welch striking him out?
Right.
Yeah.
So you have these moments. I'm kind of vaguely aware of them. I'm just coming into my sports awareness, sports fandom. I went to like one game with the boys club at Dodger Stadium. We sat at the very top of the stadium.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I'm becoming aware of what Major League Baseball is, it's simultaneous with the Yankees and the Dodgers, and so you're just associating the Dodgers with being this great team. And of course, it's our introduction on the national stage at Tommy Lasorda. There's that great clip of him going out and just, it's half of it's bleep, like he makes a visit to the mound in that World Series, and you can still find it somewhere on YouTube probably where he's just everything's bleep, 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 bleep,
I know.
bleep, bleep.
The biggest downside of now doing everything with replay and we're going to automate balls and strikes is Tommy Lasorda, Earl Weaver, the great like angry manager moments. Like we're just not going to have them anymore.
You just won't get a character like Lasorda ever again. Right. I mean, it's so top down now, right? Yeah. Like everything's coming down where, that you've got the bullpen game this game. And so, pitch counts, all this stuff is dictated.
Do managers run the teams as much as they used to, right? Or GMs control the lineup cards? Right?
And certainly, Lasorda just really popularized Dodger Blue. And, you have like Frank Sinatra coming, hanging out in the clubhouse or the dugout.
But this gets back to something else you said, here's so free agency comes to baseball. Everybody's moving around. The Dodgers were the stable team. Here's Tommy Lasorda. When he becomes manager in 77, he actually takes over a couple of games in 76. He'd been with the organization as a player. My favorite nugget about him is he did not make the World Series roster in 55 because the Dodgers decided this young left-handed pitcher ought to be on the roster just in case they needed him, named Sandy Koufax. So at least Lasorda has been quoted as saying, it took the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time to get me off of a World Series roster. But he doesn't make it as a pitcher, and he just works his way up. He pretty much has every position you could have as a coach before he finally becomes manager.
There's a story that he used a rifle to defend his teammates in Cuba during the Cuban Revolution.
Whether it's true or not, like too good to check.
His encounters with like Fidel Castro, all this stuff. So it's funny, for a decade in which they didn't win the World Series. You really think of the 70s as a high point for the Dodgers.
Well, and this is a stat that nobody cares about now because the home run has changed so much, but I believe it's the 78 Dodger team that is the first ever team to have four guys on the same team hit 30 or more home runs.
20, I think.
No, they each hit 30 that season. I think Garvey hit 30, right. Baker hit 30, Reggie Smith hits 30, and Ron Say hits. Yeah.
So there was a photo that they took. Say told me the story actually, where they posed for a photo with the scoreboard in the back that said like 30, right? Because all the four members of the team that hit 30, but they actually did it before the final guy. I don't know if it was Baker. So someone still had to hit
29. Oh, they hadn't hit the 30?
And they go on the road to the Astrodome. But
not an easy place to hit a home run back then. Yeah.
But whoever it was that needed the 30th hit it there. But they actually took the photo. It's pretty. I have a bobblehead that they made out of it. Actually,
wow.
It's a pretty famous photo at Dodger Stadium. But Say told me that we actually took it before all of us hit the 30 home runs because this was their last homestand before they went on the road.
So this is my teams. These are the teams that I grew up with. Steve Garvey was the guy, and before Steve Garvey's personal life became public, let's just say my mom and dad loved that I was looking up. Steve Garvey was Mr.
Clean.
Mr. Clean.
He'd like change his jersey if he got any dirt.
Right, and he was Mr. Dodger, and there was his father drove the team bus, and he was a kid. I mean, that was my point. The Dodgers you were a Dodger man. You were a Dodger for life, right? Garvey, as a kid, he was groomed to be a Dodger, right? Lasorda, all the way through. So it was actually always unsettling as a Dodger fan when some outsider would come in. What are they doing signing a free agent? Who is this Ken Landrew? Type of thing. Because the Dodgers always found people in their farm system. That's why it is weird to see even today's Dodgers, which are made up of players that were brought up from other teams.
Right.
But
even by the 88 World Series, I mean, Kirk Gibson,
fair.
the MVP of the league and the pivotal moment in the World Series that year.
Mm-hmm.
So they had already changed. But the 70s Dodgers, for a team that didn't win a World Series, they feel like one of the franchise. Like I think of them more than the A's. Maybe it's because I grew up.
The A's win 3. Yeah.
But
the Big Red Machine is in 3 in a row and win 2. Right.
Red Sox are in the World Series. Yankees went back to back.
Yankees go to 3 in a row.
I feel like the Dodgers belong in the conversation with all of them, even though they didn't win. Just that's how iconic.
Well, I would argue they got their 70s World Series in 81.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's really that team in the 70s.
With a notable addition.
One notable addition.
Chuck, on September 24th, 1980, my friend and his family took me to a game at Dodger Stadium. We sat out in the left field pavilion. They don't call them the bleachers, they're pavilions. We sat in the pavilion below the Diamond Vision. I had to turn around to see it. And I remember a player entered the game. It was a September call-up. Pitcher by the name of Fernando Valenzuela. He was 19 years old. He's making his fourth appearance. And he'd already generated some buzz. I remember saying, Fernando Valenzuela's pitching.
Well, a Mexican baseball player in L.A.
Yeah.
There hadn't been a lot of Mexican success stories in Major League Baseball.
No.
Right.
And to have this happen and became a, full-fledged phenomenon the next year. But, this guy pitches 1 2/3 inning relief, scored no hits, no runs, 1 walk, 2 strikeouts. Part of the 17+ innings he pitched that month without allowing an earned run. So we got a little taste of what to come. The other memorable thing that night was Manny Mota, 42 years old, who had already retired, and he kind of comes out, he was a coach, and then he kind of comes back in as a pinch hitter, one of the all-time great pinch hitters. He had the game-winning RBI as a pinch hitter in the bottom of the 12th. The Dodgers beat the Giants 5-4. So Mota ties you into the Dominican Republic aspect of the Dodgers.
Yeah. And they were one of the first ones to,
they had a camp set up there.
Yeah.
They had some great Dominicans. Pedro Guerrero came up at the end of the 1970s. Mariona Duncan, Alejandro Pena were some early Dodgers from the Dominican.
They had this young pitcher in the early 90s named Pedro Martinez.
Yeah.
Too bad that didn't work out. They liked his older brother.
Yeah.
At the time, they kept the older brother, who was a pretty good pitcher. And,
better than Pedro at the time.
But it was at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is one of those painful.
At least the Dodgers got Delino de Shields to chauffeur.
Yeah. Pedro Martinez is one of the more painful ones. But look, Fernando was to say he was a phenomenon is an understatement. It really, and it took I'm in Miami. Obviously, I'm a Dodger fan. In fact, as a kid, we subscribed to both the morning and afternoon papers. And you know why we subscribed to the afternoon paper? For the West Coast box score. It was the only way you could get a Dodger box score was for that. But Fernando was everywhere.
So, another fixture at Dodger Stadium in the 70s, especially in the 80s, was a guy named Mike Brito. And you'd see him, you watch the games.
Is this the guy with the fedora?
Panama hat.
The Panama hat. Panama hat.
And the radar gun, and he'd be tracking.
He was iconic.
Yeah. Unlit cigar in his mouth. So he was a guy in 1978, he was scouting in Mexico. He was down there to see a shortstop. And in the 5th inning, a reliever comes in to pitch. And it was Fernando Valenzuela. And in a scouting report from 1979, Brito wrote, he called Fernando a good major league prospect, strong left-hander with a lot of poise. Fernando's a guy from a farming town of a few hundred people in Mexico, Echoaquia, Mexico, the youngest of 12 children. The Dodgers bought his contract for $120,000. Another pitcher in that game, on September 24th, 1980, was a guy named Babo Castillo, as they called him. And in the minor leagues, he taught Fernando the screwball, which became his go-to pitch.
Signature pitch.
Yeah.
Well, there was 2 things about Fernando, and it's what it actually ties in. I remember was this idea of who was he looking at before he would pitch the ball. You'd see these eyes, right? And it was like, and it almost made it fitting when they got the tornado from Japan and Nomo, who also had the same thing. You're like, how is it that if you don't look at the batter, you can somehow pitch better?
So the last tie into that late season game in 1980 that I went to, the starting pitcher that night was Jerry Royce, a great Dodger pitcher. He was scheduled to be the opening day starter in 1981. But he pulls a calf muscle while running, to get in shape before the season. And Tom Lasorda decides to go with Fernando. And he throws a shutout, complete game. The next game, 9 innings, 1 run. The next game, complete game shutout. The game after that, complete game shutout. Same thing the next game. And so Fernando Mania is born. He winds up being the Rookie of the Year and the Cy Young winner, leads the league in complete game.
Nobody's ever done that again. And I don't know. I doubt that happens again because of the way, again, you go back to how rookie pitchers are treated. trust me, as now a transplant Nationals fan and the Steven Strasburg debacle that I still consider a debacle, who was probably not since Fernando had that people were so anxious to see, and they shut him down. So we'll never see a Rookie of the Year Cy Young Award winner.
You could argue that maybe it kept him from the sustained greatness, right? I mean, the way they really used
it is, but I just want to I want to just to remind people how baseball was so different even in the 80s. So, I have it is a real it sticks in my whatever you want to call it that Fernando's not in the Hall of Fame, and it really is a bummer. He will get in the Hall of Fame either as an announcer or as a player or both. I'm sorry, it's going to be posthumously that we don't get to have that he doesn't get to have this moment. But when you think about what he did in his 7 years, so first of all, he leads the league in complete games in 81 with 11. In 82, he has 18 complete games. That didn't lead the league, by the way. Okay, he had 9 in 83 complete games, 12 in 84 complete games, mind you. 85, 14. In 86, he has 20 complete games.
Wow.
In 87, he has 12 complete games, okay? Now, let me tell you about Justin Verlander, okay? Who's, sustained, the most complete games he's ever had in a season was in 2012, and it was 6.
Wow.
Okay, so we've just entirely changed. And a theory I've always had on if Fernando is if Fernando is protected the way we protect pitchers today, did he do 15 years in 8? Is sort of the, it's not quite that when you look at innings pitched. There's more innings pitched, but his 7 years, that's 7 years. It's not quite Sandy, but it's pretty impressive. And if you extrapolated it over a 12 or a 13-year career, it probably would have been just as iconic.
So the other significant numbers, in addition to the complete games and the strikeouts and everything, the attendance. You look at Dodger Stadium. 46,000 fans, 49,000 fans, 53,000 fans. When he pitched, 50 to 60% of the TVs in use in LA, the share, as we call it, were watching the Dodgers. That was the type of impact he was on. But also, they're making songs about him in LA. There was a pair of radio guys in LA, morning show. Mm-hmm. They came up with a proposal. They wanted to rename the San Fernando Valley the San Fernando Valenzuela.
Yeah.
That's how popular it was. And it's just a cultural earthquake. Latino fans return en masse to Chavez.
I believe, and this is another one of those I will confess to the too good to check because I couldn't verify this, but I believe, because I remember reading this years ago, that the Dodgers made more money on their Spanish language media rights in the 80s because of Fernando than the Minnesota Twins did for all their TV rights in Minnesota. That's how valuable the Spanish language TV rights. And it just added, we sort of, when does a franchise become a dynasty, right? And in many ways, this is the exercise we want to try to get at. For the Dodgers, the dynasty does seem to begin in LA, even though this is a team born in Brooklyn. It sort of, you see that it begins in LA, and it's because of this sustain. They have stars immediately, right? Vin Scully's the off-field star, Sandy Koufax, the on-field star. Then we immediately go to Drysdale, and then you have Garvey, who's himself Hollywood. His wife is an actress, and he's a star. And then Fernando's this big star. It's a team of stars. They're not quite winning the World Series enough to say they're the number one baseball team, but they're on their way to dynasty.
Yeah, they're getting there. And the impact of Fernando, it still felt to this day, and it just changes the tone and the tenor of the Dodgers. So the fact that, we have mariachi bands on opening day now.
But remember how Dodger Stadium is born.
Yeah.
It is born
Chavez Ravine, right?
as a way displacing Mexican Americans.
Right.
There's anger. There were you talk to old timers in LA and they'll say there were many Mexican Americans who refused to root for the Dodgers, mad and angry about it because of what happened at Chavez Ravine. And Fernando,
the LA Times had a great series. I think it was the 40th anniversary of Fernando Mania. They went and they looked back and great video series actually. Mm-hmm. And Fernando's in it speaking a lot of English actually, but you have people in that saying that they just had harbored this resentment, but Fernando brings them back. And then to this day, the amount of Latino fans that you see, Mexican Americans,
and it's still Fernando
Stadium, and they're wearing Valenzuela jerseys.
It is just like what I was saying. What it is for for many Jewish Americans about Sandy. For Mexican Americans, that's Fernando, isn't it?
And he was such a big figure. And so, I'd go to Dodger games, covering Dodger games in the press box. You'd see Fernando walking in there.
He was the Spanish language
he's Spanish language broadcaster right.
for decades.
Yeah. So he's there. And it's not that he was unfriendly, but I just felt I didn't want to take any of his time. I didn't want to talk to him, ask him a bunch of questions, because I just felt like I could only begin to imagine the pressure that this iconic figure, anytime he stepped out of the house in LA.
Yeah.
And so I figured he didn't need me. He didn't need a single additional person coming up to him. Hey, Fernando, tell me about the time. So it's just the amount of pressure he must have felt, the way he carried himself, the way he was looked up to, the way, it's funny. He was the franchise to a significant portion of Los Angeles. Fernando Valenzuela was the Dodgers.
Right.
And to never have any type of downfall, no major scandal, but the way that he...
No, the only scandal is, did Tommy burn out his arm?
Yeah.
I say this with love with Tommy, because Tommy did do something that no manager in their right mind would have done, is he left him in the World Series after he gave up all the... And you know what? When he left him in, Fernando became unhittable.
Yeah. So they win the World Series that year, perfect year. It overlooks the fact that was a strike year.
Strike short, crazy year.
Season, but in LA it's remembered as...
there's this fun trivia question that the team with the best record in baseball never made the playoffs.
Yeah. They split the season that year into the first half and the second half. And so the winner of the first half played the winner of the second half.
First division series year.
Yeah.
And in fact, there were two moments. The Dodgers shouldn't have gotten out of the division series with the Astros. Then they play this young team from Montreal, and it's Rick Monday who does the saving home run. But there were a lot of pitfalls for that 81 Dodger team. And then they go down 2-0 in the World Series and win 4 straight to win the whole thing.
They win again in 88, of course, the Oral Hershiser year, to kind of conclude that era of the Dodgers.
And it really does. It's the end of Tom. It's not Tommy's last year.
Yeah, because he goes all the way to 96.
But it felt like the beginning of the end.
Yeah. Well,
of that era.
Similar to how Fernando probably burned out from overuse, right? And didn't get the
he really wasn't a factor in the 88 season, the way he was.
Although he sticks around, throws a no-hitter in 1990, which I was at, by the way. So
he did that for the Orioles?
No, for the Dodgers.
That one was for the Dodgers.
It was 1990. So I was actually at that game. It was funny. So former Dodger Dave Stewart had pitched a no-hitter earlier today in Toronto. And they're showing the highlights on the scoreboard. And I'm thinking, man, it would be great to be there for a no-hitter someday. And literally that game, Fernando throws a no-hitter.
Is that your only no-hitter?
Only no-hitter I've ever seen in person. So it's funny because I can
even
still
as a sports writer, it's still very uncommon to be in attendance.
I can still hear Vin Scully's call, though. That's how ingrained he is. Like the call is, if you have a sombrero, throw it in the air.
Oh, the sombrero. Line. Yes.
So that was when he said it. Was after the last out was a ground ball by Pedro Guerrero, former Dodger. Who hit a grounder up the middle for the final out. But as we get into the 90s, another distinctive player. So we have the
88. There's 88.
Kirk Gibson.
It is such a. It's funny. The Dodgers are arguably have 3 or 4 of the most famous playoff walk-offs ever. The negative, the shot we heard around the world. You have Gibson.
Freddie Freeman.
Now you have Freddie Freeman.
Yeah.
Is sitting there.
I love the fact that Joe Davis echoed Ben Scully's call. She is gone. And he used the exact same, probably the 3 most beloved words in Dodger fan history. She is gone. It just still gives me goosebumps every time I watch that play. And I still laugh every time I see the parking lights or the brake lights come on out beyond the right field pavilion. As soon as people realize, oh my God, Gibson just hit a home run.
One of my favorite things that, the internet's terrible for a lot of reasons, but one of the great things the internet does let us have is you can watch the entire bottom of the ninth.
Yeah.
And Scully's call for the entire bottom of the ninth. It is still there. I implore you, if you've never, I made my son watch it to just try to understand how improbable this was. How many times the weak foul tip that almost stays fair. And it's like, well, he's just going to get tagged out. Game's over. I have this weird memory. I was at a high school football game, not playing. I was attending, and it's in Miami, and over the speaker, they go, update from the World Series, Miami's own Jose Canseco, because Jose Canseco was this new up and coming superstar at the time. And everybody's cheering for the A's in Miami because of Canseco. And this is before we know all the other stuff about him. But he's just, the Bash Brothers, and it's such an exciting thing. And I'm just all depressed. Oh man, I'm missing this, and I had to get home. And so you hear the Canseco, and then and I actually I heard Jack Buck's call because I was in a car on the radio going home after the game. And I end up seeing
So I didn't hear either live because I was working that night. I was a freshman here at Northwestern and had to work that night. And my roommate called.
You just outed our ages and our ages. We're pretty close.
So my roommate called over and told me what happened. I also missed Freeman's home run live. I saw it on the app. I just see everyone all of a sudden going around the bases.
Go ahead.
So the other thing with that is you mentioned Canseco. So Jim Murray, the great Pulitzer Prize winning sports columnist at the LA Times, Canseco just hits a bomb.
Hit a grand slam that guy. I believe it was a grand slam.
And so Murray has his whole column written. Like, this is one of the great home runs in World Series
fourth,
history.
and it's going to be a fourth. Yeah.
So he's got his whole story written, and then Kirk Gibson changed the story.
So for me, the 88, my father died in November of 88. He was in the hospital for a long time, for 52 days in ICU. We watched that world. That's the last thing we got to do together. He was watch that World Series. So it's for, and this is why do we love sports? Because they're really about helping us mark time in our own lives. And so for me, I know we're going to, the 88 World Series is just forever memorialized. And it's like, I always want to go up to Kirk Gibson and thank him for giving my dad a great memory before literally one of the lasting memories.
The last day of my grandmother's life, and she was a big Laker fan, was the comeback of the Game 7. Comeback for the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals against Portland.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and that whole finals that year. My mom passed a few days after the NBA Finals that year. So, one of the last things she did was went to Game 7 it was Game 6 for the Lakers to see that. So yeah, I think of that 2000 Finals the same way you think of that 1988 World Series.
So when you look at the Dodgers now, when we look backwards, right? 88 is this. I remember Bob Costas, I think, said it was the worst World Series lineup in the history.
Yeah.
And
so
Tommy
we should
Lasorda,
think about it as one of the great upsets.
It's still one of the most remarkable. Everything about it. That team had no business. Mickey Hatcher hit more home runs in the World Series than he did all year. 2 in the World Series, 1 during the season, right? Mickey Hatcher was starting. Mickey Hatcher was a great, sort of utility man, but Mickey Hatcher had to start, right?
For the World Series champion. So decades later, I'm in the green room at ESPN, and Earl Hershiser is there, and he has World Series. And he said, "Here, do you want to try it on?" And I'd actually held championship rings before, but that was his ring. He won that ring single handedly almost. The guy he was the MVP. Pitches in relief in the league championship series against the Mets. It was.
Kind of modern now that we see now, when you see whether it was Max Scherzer with the Nats or what we saw with Yamamoto.
Ties or breaks Don Drysdale's shutout inning streak during the down the stretch to get the Dodgers into the playoffs. So he single-handedly, I felt with one swing of the bat from Gibson.
Trust me, there's Mets fans in my life that are bitter about that 88 season because they're like, you guys had no business winning the NLCS. You're right.
Yeah. Really one of the great upsets.
But it is really the end. From when you look at the Dodgers between 89 and arguably the turmoil begins, right? The O'Malleys have to sell.
That's all later though. But I would say first, it's not, maybe we didn't realize it at the time somewhat though, but in the 90s with Hideo Nomo.
Yes.
So which in some ways continues the path.
Right. Before there's Ichiro, Robinson. People forget this. Before there's Ichiro, there's Nomo. And the importance of Nomo in some ways the Kurt Flood of Japanese baseball players.
Yeah.
Because it gets the Japanese baseball leagues essentially
didn't take a Supreme Court ruling.
But he essentially forces the hand of Japanese baseball leagues to loosen their rules about how long before you get to leave. And Nomo sort of, he retires.
Yeah.
He
so
finds
back
a loophole.
then there was a rule that you had to play 10 years in Japan before you could leave.
Unless you retired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it actually, his hand was forced in this regard. So the leverage Japanese league teams had was they could force players onto something called the voluntary retired list. So they had made an offer, Nomo and his agent made a proposal of a 6-year, $36 million contract demand. It's considered outrageous at the time, right? Forced the team's hand. So they said, we're not paying that. We're going to put you on the voluntary retired list. So they said, okay. If that's how you feel, if we're retired, that means
we can go to
we go to LA. So interesting, Peter O'Malley, who had taken over for his father Walter at the time, is owning the Dodgers. He was worried that signing Nomo would actually ruin the Dodgers' reputation in Japan, which went back to the 1950s. There's actually a Japanese a stone lantern that was given to the Dodgers by Japanese sports writers in 1965. That's recently been restored and put outside the stadium. But it was a reflection of the relationship between the Dodgers and Japan. And he's like, well, if we start taking their players, they're not going to love us. But he actually almost went to the Mariners first, but he didn't pass the physical. Then they tried the Giants, and then the Dodgers wound up with them. The agent, Arn Tellem was the agent who worked with Nomo's agent, Don Nomura. And he actually mentioned the Dodgers' history of diversity and the large Japanese population. So this kind of goes into theory.
Peter O'Malley would be talked into it.
Yeah. He wasn't really with it, but
another barrier broken.
Yeah, and it kind of goes into the notion Mark and Gladwell talked about in Outliers, that sometimes things are a result of, they could only happen because of a certain place, right? So it's not just nature versus nurture, but it's kind of that the environment dictates what happens. In this case, the Dodgers' history of diversity and the move to LA and the large Asian population in LA and the diverse population in LA helped facilitate or maybe brought about this Hideo Nomo signing in 1995.
It could have easily been San Francisco. It is interesting that LA is the one, because they've consistently done that. Right?
This is kind of funny side note of this. Nomo, with the big Japanese media crowd following her around in spring training that year, they're playing the Yankees, and it catches Jordan Steinbrenner's attention.
Yes, he does.
So he calls in Derek Hall, who was then with the Dodgers, and he asks, "Hey, who is this guy?" So Hall told him. 2 years later, the Yankees had Hideki Rabu.
Yeah. Well, Steinbrenner, he didn't like that there was more media covering the Dodgers than there was covering the Yankees.
Let's get some of these.
Let's get these guys over here. Let's get these guys over here.
Who later he called Rabu a fat pussy toad.
Yep, the toad. Yeah, there was some terrible nickname for him. Nomo has one of these. He's a guy that is. I think he's definitely a Dodger icon. He does not have Hall of Fame stats, but he still has. I mean, he's a no-hitter in each league.
Yeah.
And his no-hitters are one's at Coors Field and the other's at Camden Yards. Okay. This is not like he's doing it at the old, at the Tiger Stadium, which is a big pitcher's ballpark, or even Pac-Bell or the old
Coliseum, right?
Yeah. These are all considered hitters' parks. I mean, I'm sorry. I remember when I saw a one-hitter at Coors Field and I thought I had seen history. Nomo gets a no-hitter at Coors Field. I remember when that happened. It felt like, well, that felt extra special for some reason.
Well, I remember Hideo Nomo threw a no-hitter at Coors Field.
Right.
It's like he scored 83 points. Bam Adebayo.
Right. It's like the same thing. You're like, Coors Field?
So Nomo that first year, 16 strikeouts in a game, finishes the season with a league-leading 236 strikeouts and 3 shutouts. Not quite the same attendance impact as Fernando, but he did have a 53,000 and averaged almost 49,000 a game over a 6-start stretch at Dodger Stadium.
But it was the beginning of the Dodgers sort of. I mean, look, we'd see it. You had Chan Ho Park was the first Korean player, but you had Ryu. Boy, when he would come, those were automatic sellouts of Koreatown.
Yeah,
would just come too.
And,
so
bringing them to mind, the oft overlooked Korean population in LA, but like if you go to Dodger Stadium through Surface Street to try to avoid the freeway, you go right through Koreatown. It's like unavoidable.
But on Ryu pitching nights, right? Huge,
like,
right?
To be able to activate, this fan base in addition to the Japanese fan base now, right? So yeah, Chan-Ho Park from Korea, Hee-Seop Choi, another big slugger that the Dodgers signed. I would say if Jackie or someone like him was inevitable. I mean, Larry Doby was 11 weeks after Jackie Robinson, right? So like that breaking of the color line was inevitable, right? Nomo, not necessarily, right? Like I'm not sure that Hideo Nomo or Irabu or any like inevitable.
I could argue
that Jackie and we talked about the movement and the time in
but if you actually
the United States in the 1940s.
Right.
That was not what was going on in the U.S. in the 1990s.
No, but I actually would argue in the 1990s, this is now to bring it back a little bit to sort of my terrain, this is the beginning of globalization, right? This is the beginning of free trade agreements everywhere. NAFTA puts place. We're opening the doors with China. We're having all this trade. So we're already moving goods, globalization. So in some ways, of course, sports is going to globalize. And I think now you look back on it, well, yeah, it's inevitable. Globalization allowed for that to happen, and somebody had to be first. What's funny is that Ichiro was playing professionally starting in 1993. When Nomo came over, Ichiro was already playing professional ball. My goodness, he was a Hall of Famer while here. Imagine had he started. Imagine had he came over with Nomo.
Yeah.
At that time, but it is. I think now when you look at it. And you look at the larger, what was happening around the world, it actually also just seems just as inevitable.
And then I think I still, I don't know. I don't know if I'd give because I think a lot of that had preceded Nomo in some ways, especially like Japanese business investment in Los Angeles, for example.
was peak 80s. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the thing. Like first you had to come with the money,
right?
Then you come with the culture.
But the fact that Jackie precedes the civil rights movement in the United States.
Right, but does Jackie happen without World War II?
No.
Right. And I think that, because Black Americans were so important to the fight in World War II, right, you do have Truman, desegregating the military, right? That is, so one could argue that the civil rights movement was really taking it,
right?
What would culminate in the 60s was percolating right around with World War, with the end of World War II. So easier to look backwards.
So, just like everything after Watergate was Gate, every scandal. So everything after Fernando Mania was Mania.
So then it became Nomo Mania.
Yeah. They were similar in that, again, those distinctive windups.
The windups.
They called him the tornado,
right?
Because he had that big twisting thing. He'd turn his back. But yeah, I think it does take us all the way to Shohei Ohtani, right? And I think the fact that Nomo and the Dodgers' success with Ohtani.
When does Ohtani become a Dodger? You know what I mean by that? Is he a Dodger? Is he? Because I go back and I struggle with this this version of the Dodgers, because the only thing with today's with the modern Dodgers is that they always began as Dodgers. They're stars normally. Right. And Ohtani is the first one that's purchased from somebody else.
Well, here's the thing. I think he becomes a Dodger his first postseason at bat.
Yeah. When he hits,
because we didn't get to see him in the postseason with the Angels.
You're right.
Great failure of the Angels. They have Trout and Ohtani, two all-time greats.
Yeah.
And we never get. And so just
like
think
the
of these
Red Sox
moments.
Ted Williams, right?
Yeah,
They never
just
get
think
to
of these moments that we've seen. That on a national stage, international stage, really, with Ohtani, the fact that the Dodgers made it possible. So, like, we should all be thankful. If you're a baseball fan, you should be thankful for the Dodgers spending these, ludicrous, outrageous contracts.
And any first thing he does as a Dodger is something nobody's ever done before, a 50-50 season.
Yeah.
And it's something nobody knew that Ohtani was going to, you're going to steal bases?
Right. Which
I don't think that
probably doesn't go for if he's pitching, but because he's out for the year as a pitcher because of his shoulder injury, he's like, hey, why not go for 50-50? I'm sure on his to-do list is win Cy Young and MVP the same year. You know, as a true baseball MVP. You know, like
Can he do both?
not winning like Clayton Kershaw
has won both a Cy Young and an MVP.
Yeah,
in the same year,
but strictly for his pitching.
Right.
Like Ohtani could do it like winning the Cy Young and also winning it'd be like awesome. You know, he's the MVP of the league. Yeah. He's like, you know, in some cases, like with Kershaw, it's like, oh, you know, he's the MVP. He's the most valuable because he's that good of a pitcher.
I can be on both sides of that argument about whether pitchers should be eligible for the MVP or not.
I think
you have your own award.
Right.
Is
but
one
if
argument.
You're the pitcher, if you're the most valuable,
yeah.
You know,
then we need to have a separate hitter award.
No,
if you're going to do that.
I just think in some cases the pitcher is the most valuable. Like the batters have more opportunity, more valuable because they're playing more often. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the pitcher is the most valuable. If like you single-handedly drag your team, like just like, you know, Paul Hershiser was the most valuable player for the Dodgers down that stretch through his pitching in '88.
Well, in some ways, so Nomo is the bridge between sort of the 80s Dodgers and the Dodgers we know today, right? If you would be on the field, I guess maybe you'd throw Mike Piazza in there as sort of a bridge person.
Piazza, Eric Hill. So they also continue, this might be a good time to talk about just that.
The Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, the run of Rookie of the Years, where I think they had 5 straight Rookie of the Years in the
They went 70s to 80s. Well, culminating with, the year after Fernando was that the Rick Sutcliffe? Steve Sachs was 82.
Maybe, yeah.
Rick Sutcliffe was 80.
Sutcliffe would have been earlier than that, right?
Or was Sutcliffe 70? Yeah. Anyway, and then they have 4, so you've got like Eric Karros and Piazza, and you got another run, you know, in the 90s too. So it's kind of the end of that era. But that string of rookies. So if you think about it, right, they have these incredible. The farm system produces these incredible players in the 70s that do produce 2 World Series winners,
right,
in the 80s. They get this. They have another run in the 90s, and those guys, they don't quite get them. They don't get them all the way there, right? They don't get them. You have Karros, Piazza, Raul Mondesi, and Nomo, Hollinsworth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was 5 in a row. Wow. Todd Hollinsworth. That's the one you forget. That's the one you forget in 96. But those 5 in a row, I think the assumption was, I know as a Dodger fan in the 90s, I thought this like, when is this team going to win the whole thing? Yeah. When is this team going to take the next step? Yeah. And they were always, this team seemed to struggle.
Instead, they go on and on. Their last, you know, since that Kirk Gibson moment in that '88 World Series, you know, they just struggle to duplicate it. I would say the Nomo signing was the last legacy moment for the O'Malley family. So, you know, Peter had taken over from his father in 1979, 2 World Series during his tenure. The explosion in the so it's interesting what makes him sell in the end of the O'Malley ownership era is they become too valuable.
And it was tax law issues.
Yeah, because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to pass them along to his kids. So they were worth $2 million in the 1960. They were valued at, or they wound up being sold in 1998 for $311 million.
It's a lot of taxes.
The Fox company buys them, and things start to change. So the Dodgers had 2 managers from 1954 to 1996, Walter Alston and Tommy Lasorda. After the sale to Fox, they fired Bill Russell in the second year. The franchise went through 6 managers in 18 years over the next 18 years. They traded the team's most popular player, Mike Piazza, who was, you know, this beloved member of the Dodgers, drafted in the 62nd round.
Well, and he was a connection to Tommy because it was the family it was a family friend of Tommy's.
Godson or something like
Godson, and he's like, sure, draft him. What the heck?
And then becomes this just, you know, one of the great power hitting catchers of all time, right?
He's a bit bitter. There's a little bitterness still with Piazza because
he should be.
He doesn't feel like his career is respected enough because it's always had a look. Every success story in the 90s has the cloud.
There's that cloud.
The cloud sits over you on that. Fair or unfair, it is. About the only person that the cloud is not there for in the 90s is Ken Griffey Jr.
But also, Piazza should have been beloved by the Dodgers.
Should have been a Dodger.
They just kind of trade him overnight.
You know, if you talk to Mets fans, they would argue Piazza's one of their most iconic guys.
Well, I mean,
because he meant a lot to them,
and especially in that post, you know, 9/11.
That was an important moment.
And what he did for them, that moments there.
So, this is, by the way, an interesting period with media companies in sports.
Yes,
because you have Disney and the Anaheim Mighty, literally,
Right.
they invent a franchise out of a movie, right? The Anaheim Mighty Ducks.
And then they buy the Angels,
Right.
From Gene Autry, beloved,
Country music singer, right? And then the Fox decides to buy the Dodgers, and you think, what's going on here?
So it's a medium. So what's interesting, but it fails really quickly.
Both
like
companies realize
Time Warner merger.
Maybe this isn't a good idea.
So Disney had hoped to create their own regional sports network.
Yes,
they were going to create a Disney Sports West, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then that never got off the ground. And so they wound up bailing on the Ducks and the Angels. And then, Fox, they were thinking of the Dodgers as content.
Yep.
And
they were thinking the same thing, thinking about they could build something.
And they already had the regional sports networks in place. Fox Sports West, Fox Sports West 2. The problem was they didn't run the Dodgers well, and they just came along in a time when the contracts were exploding, and the Dodgers became a losing proposition for them. They couldn't wait to sell them. So kind of one of my favorite moments, this kind of just shows the Foxization. So they brought in Bob Graziano, who was a former accountant, made him the president and CEO. Then later they bring in Bob Daly from Warner Brothers, make him the chairman and CEO. So I used to call them Corporate Bob and Showbiz Bob.
Did you put that in print?
Yeah, I refer to them in the LA Times as Corporate Bob and Showbiz Bob. But it felt like it had nothing to do with baseball, right? And
it was pretty clear.
Yeah.
It felt like it had nothing to do with baseball.
They throw out a $105 million contract to Kevin Brown, the pitcher, that included personal use of the team jet so he could go back and forth to Georgia when he wanted. They fired Davey Johnson's manager, but they said, well, we'll hold off till when you want to leave, but the word gets out. So they're losing. They can't wait to sell the team. So they're so desperate that they sold the team to Frank McCourt.
Well, but literally they borrow money.
Right, the McCourts had.
McCourts didn't have the money to purchase them.
Fox had to loan them money. Chuck, if you're selling me a house, but I got to borrow money from you to buy your house, would you sign off on that?
I know if I were on the other side of it, I would. But that'd be a hell of a deal.
So McCourt, who had made his money in parking lots.
This is where you had an old colleague named T.J. Snipers.
Okay. Parking lot attendant.
And he used to just refer to the McCourts as the parking lot attendant. And as a Dodger fan at the time who was angry at the Dodgers' lack of spending and stuff, he sometimes spoke for the angry fan.
Yeah, well, there was another guy in town, a radio guy, Joe McDonald, who would call McCourt bankrupt because he was like, he doesn't have the money. And it turned out he didn't go bankrupt. The Dodgers went bankrupt at least. So,
But by the way, for the McCourts, it was a great deal. They made a ton of money eventually.
Because they borrowed $200 million for the purchase price of $400 million. So, a lot goes sideways when McCourts get divorced, and a lot comes out about the lavish lifestyles they're living. They're using the Dodgers to help fund these lavish lifestyles. They buy a house in Malibu. They have somebody that.
By the way, in politics, we have politicians sometimes do the same thing. They use the money they raise, and they use that money to fund their lifestyle, not their actual money.
Yeah.
And that's illegal and scandalous. Here it was, I guess, legal, but to fans it was scandalous.
Right. So the most outrageous thing, it wasn't the most expensive, but the most outrageous, they had someone on a 6-figure retainer, someone in Boston, back in Boston, which is where they came from. And his role was to send good vibes to the Dodgers telepathically from Boston. And they're paying him over $100,000 a year to just send positive vibes out to the team from across the country.
Well, they did make a couple. McCourt can say that on the field, he left the team in fairly good shape.
Somewhat. Matt Camp, some players that did well.
They made a couple NLCSs.
Yeah, they won. They reached the playoffs. So they won in the first 19 seasons. After winning the '88 World Series, the Dodgers only reached the playoffs 4 times. Went to a single playoff game. Rest in peace, Jose Lima. Lima time was the winning pitcher in that. Yeah. So the attendance numbers look similar because people kept their season tickets. They weren't going to the game. No. And you could just cruise on in and out. We talked about parking lots of Dodger Stadium, they were empty, and there was nobody going to the games.
This is when the Lakers took over LA for a while.
Yeah. So
when you would say LA was a Laker town more than a Dodger.
Absolutely, because again, both the Lakers and the Dodgers win in '88. Mm-hmm. And it felt like the Lakers maybe kind of pulled even. But then, as the Dodgers fall off, and then Kobe and Shaq come to the Lakers, and then they're winning 5 championships in the 2000s. And the Dodgers, again, have this long drought without winning a playoff series. So Bud Selig forces the team to sell. It's funny. McCourt thought he had a lifeline.
Yeah.
He had a
his own
rights
TV deal.
for like $3 billion for 17 years. But McCourt's like, no,
but it was leveraged up the yin yang.
Yeah.
It was,
and also it's
really,
like, you guys aren't making payroll right now. Like, you're struggling to make payroll. Like, no, you don't have the right to sign this deal.
Well, and then the divorce, he had to sell the team in order to fulfill the divorce proceeding.
And part of the problem was like half the money would have gone directly to McCourt, not to the Dodgers. So Selig nixes the deal. The Dodgers go bankrupt.
Now might be the single most important moment in making the Dodgers a dynasty.
Yeah, because it's
a bankruptcy,
and it took control out of the hands of the Dodgers and McCourt, and now it goes through the bankruptcy court, and MLB has final say, and so in comes back Walter and Guggenheim.
And I'm going to rant a second here on Bud Selig. So Bud Selig at first was obsessed with always finding family owners. He did this. He didn't want these big partnerships. He worried it would fuel free agent spending. He was a family-owned Brewers. And so he was always constantly looking for ownership groups. I know this because
he lobbied for McCourt.
He wanted the McCourts
to take over from Fox.
This happened with the Nationals. When they moved the Expos, there were two competing groups. One had more money, but it was a partnership. It was a couple of managing partners. By the way, very similar to what the Dodgers ownership structure now looks like today. This was one idea. The other was a family real estate empire, but it was family. Well, they didn't have quite as much money, but they had enough. And because Selig always was looking he wanted family-owned teams because he thought it was essentially a way to restrict spending without formally trying to restrict spending. The McCourt thing is such a disaster. Selig finally gives up on that and allows what we now have today. And now what I think sports ownership is going to be all over the country, which is these massive sort of private equity partnership
mixed with sovereign wealth funds.
All sorts of things. But in some ways, Selig was trying to prevent this. It went so bad with the McCourts that it opens the door to the modern ownership structures we're seeing today.
Yeah. So an inadvertent way that the Dodgers become
another barrier breaker
here and barrier breakers here. I would argue, I mean, certainly Dodger fans would tell you this has been good for them, but I think it's good for the sport. Again, the fact that we get to see Shohei Ohtani in the playoffs, in the postseason on this national stage, putting out some historic performances, right? And then, but also the fact that they almost lost within inches and single pitches here of losing to the Blue Jays. So it's not like the Dodgers are just walking their way to the World Series.
That's the beauty of baseball, right? Is it the randomness of baseball at times allows for an underdog to win a game in any given moment. See Team Venezuela, Team USA.
Or even a series.
It's harder to do that in football. It's harder to do that in basketball. But it's interesting you say that the Dodgers, that might be good for the game. Because here's is it good for your sport if you run football, baseball, or basketball, or hockey, right? Any of these major sports, or soccer. If you have 2 or 3 teams dominating that are dynasties, or that you have a level playing field every year.
So I've argued this with Adam Silver, that the NBA, the peak of the NBA, if you have fondness for the NBA in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Well, in the 80s, it was the Lakers and the Celtics. Yeah. And in the 90s, literally from 91 to 98, it was literally the Bulls with the brief hiatus when the Rockets won too.
Yeah.
So, it was extremely top heavy and not open to all. And what we have now in the NBA is we've had a different champion like each of the last 7 years. I don't think you could say this is a golden era of NBA basketball.
Well, I always talk about this is what makes the NFL unique. The NFL has pulled this off. And I always use the example of the 2014 World Series. 2014 World Series was between San Francisco Giants and the Kansas City Royals, one of the lowest rated World Series ever. We've had a Super Bowl in the last 10 years between the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Entirely different spectacle, right? Literally the same 2 markets. Yeah. Okay, just 2 different sports and just sort of how. Now, part of that is baseball's very local. It's popular locally, and the only teams you follow outside of your own are the super teams. And that's why, in a weird way, and I think basketball's the same way, you follow your local team plus the super teams. And I think with football, it's just different.
So one of the things that was interesting, because the terms of the the TV deal, or when the Dodgers took over, it was going through bankruptcy court and not Major League Baseball. It's a different revenue share than it would be otherwise. So it's based on a fixed amount currently set on $130 million. That's the amount that is eligible for the revenue sharing portion. Even though the deal is currently worth $330 million a year, it could go up to $500 million a year. So the Dodgers can thank Frank McCourt in some ways for setting this up.
They have a better deal on. They're sharing less revenue than they should.
Yes.
Well, let's just say if the baseball players union is paying attention.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a unique. We're not going to get into that in this episode, but this is going to be a unique challenge.
So even with that, so let's look at kind of the modern Dodgers now. The 2025 payroll was almost $400 million, $169 million luxury tax.
Okay. $400 million. Just think about that. Put a pin in that, because how much did Pierre O'Malley sell the Dodgers for?
200.
Right.
Yeah.
Think about it. So the payroll of the Dodgers in 2025,
right?
Just the payroll for that 1 year,
to 300, I think, and then they were sold
is more
for 400.
Right. Is more.
Yeah.
Than what they sold for in 1999.
Or about what McCourt paid for them with Fox's
themselves.
Money, half of it. The Dodgers, the warning sign. They have more than $1 billion in deferred salaries going into the 2040s.
Sorry, if the United States government can handle $39 trillion in debt, maybe the Dodgers can handle.
But will the regional sports network model even exist by the 2040s?
It's going to exist by the end of this podcast.
Yeah. What will the national TV deals with? So the national TV, it just went from $500 million in 2025 to around $225 million in 2026. So what were the nationals? So some red lights down the road. And this kind of gets us into some of the not so great things about the Dodgers.
Well, and I was just going to say, look, we're not here, and we're going to do this when we do these. We're not here to smear any teams. We're not here to say, here's why you should hate Team X. And we're not, but just like every human being has good days and bad days, every dynasty has some low points, and there's a few low points. Dodgers broke a lot of barriers. There's one barrier. Not only have they not broken, they've actually been a bit retro, to be polite.
To be fair or polite, sports in general lags as opposed to leads when it comes to LGBT issues.
Right. Almost every other thing on diversity, sports leads.
Is at the forefront, right?
Sports leads, and look at women in baseball executive positions. We've got referees, umpire, all these places we're trying to
in sports and the impact that's had in our society overall, right?
LGBT, all of sports struggles with this.
Yeah,
and the Dodgers are no exception.
Going back to Glenn Burke, player on the team in the 1970s. Credit with helping invent the high five, by the way. Another innovation we can.
He and Dusty Baker,
Dodgers.
right?
Yeah, the first
Glenn
high
Burke
five.
and Dusty Baker.
Yeah,
right.
But also, an early gay player, although not openly gay.
Right.
In fact, the Dodgers offered him a $75,000 bonus if he got married, so that they could adamantly say that he wasn't gay. Right. He refused. The Dodgers traded him. And he was deeply hurt by that,
and it ruined his career.
Yeah. And he was never the same. The fact that Tommy Lasorda refused to acknowledge that his son died of AIDS and that his son was gay, and he just would not accept it. One of the more painful
articles I've ever read is a story of Tommy. I think it was Esquire.
Yeah, it's called Tangled Up in Blue.
Tangled Up in Blue. Yeah. And it's a torturous, it's a father and son relationship. Yeah. It's not about the Dodgers, this is generational, this is cultural, this is a lot of things, this is religious, we know all this stuff, but it's all part of the story, and it
right.
Because
he loved his son.
He did.
It's not like he disowned him.
No, just the opposite. He just was in denial. He was in denial
of the reality of who his son was.
Right. And he would not refuse to do
it. In 2000, there was an incident. Two women were kicked out of the ballpark after they kissed, and another fan complained, and the women were summarily escorted out of the ballpark. The Dodgers apologized. They wound up giving 5,000 tickets to LGBT groups, but again, they were put on their heels, and their initial reaction was not the right reaction. There was a 2023 Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence.
Yes.
Queer and trans people who dress as nuns were invited to an event at Dodger Stadium. There was some backlash.
And they were
disinvited. There was backlash about the backlash. They were invited again. It was a mess. And again, either have the conviction or have the awareness and avoid these type of misses. So let's see if they can kind of move to the forefront on these, which is kind of the discrimination of our time. I mean,
we are in
people
that
are literally having their identities taken away from them in certain states, in the state of Kansas, and can't be allowed to have driver's license or IDs. Erasure, basically, which in a state where you need an ID to vote. So there's an opportunity to be had for some team in sports to take the lead on.
And one of the things I like to, there's this, you'll hear the debate, and maybe some of you are going to say, hey, stick to sports, guys. And it's like, well, that's the whole point of this. Sports, culture, politics, it's all interwoven. And by the way, we celebrate Jackie Robinson.
Right.
Well, that was a political decision that was made by Branch Rickey. Yes, it was about an on-the-field product, but it was a political decision too. So, and one would argue sports playing politics only helps society. So let's not pretend, ever stick to sports. Well, sports is life. So yeah, we'll stick to life.
So we'll stick to sports here. We'll get into the quintessential sports argument.
We will in a minute, but we probably ought to look. There's a few other warts that are, you can't tell the full Dodger story without the infamous Nightline incident with Al Campanis, then GM, where he had here's a team that is associated.
Ironically, it was to commemorate
Jackie Robinson. And he's on Nightline to commemorate, and the question was about the lack of black front office, black managers and black general managers, I believe.
Yeah. And the regrettable phrase that Campanis said as he did this appearance live from the field at the Astrodome is that blacks the necessities, and then he doubles down and says, why aren't blacks good swimmers? They're not buoyant, right?
I mean, Koppel literally couldn't believe what he heard and sort of, he wasn't following
his garbage, right?
Right. He was like, like, wait a minute, did you say what I think you said?
Yeah. Gives them the opportunity
to clean it up,
to get out, right? Yeah. And then that's when he doubles down and talks about swimmers and stuff like that. So, well, I would say the Dodgers did what they had to do, and they let him go, after
immediately.
This lengthy tenure that dated back to the Jackie Robinson era.
That's the irony. Right? He came from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Campanis was basically a lifer.
Yeah.
A Dodger lifer.
So, that was a moment that kind of, but I think they more than made up for it though when, this is coming. It's just a few years after Fernando Mania, right? But Nomo Mania is still to come.
To come.
And Chan-Ho Park and again, the leadership that they showed in those areas.
So now we're going to end with the quintessential debates that everybody likes to have. And that is your various Mount Rushmores. And I will confess, I advocated that we should have multiple Mount Rushmores, that I could have.
That's cheating.
Like,
let's take an easy way out.
Let's have the Mount Rushmore of the Dodger pitchers, because then I could have my all-time top 4 pitching staff. Let's have the top 4. And you're like, no, you just got to pick 4.
To quote John Tenney, we got to do it this way because it is hard. To quote Kennedy's advocacy for going to the moon, because it is hard.
So look, I think there's a lot. Look, so we only have 4 slots. We're going to do this.
It's hard.
We have 4 slots. Now we will acknowledge that there's one
no-brainer.
There's one no-brainer that's an automatic that you have to. It's Jackie
Robinson, Mount Rushmore.
All right. So neither one of us argued about that. So you put him there. So you have 3 other slots.
Agreement and 2 other ones.
We do, but let's not give it away yet. Okay. Come on, let's not spoiler alert. Because there are multiple. So we have 3 slots. So you have plenty of candidates. We've talked about a bunch of them. Look, you've got tricky. Look, we got two pitchers who've won 3 Cy Youngs, Kershaw and Koufax, so they have to be considered. Roy Campanella won 3 MVPs. All right, like you got to consider him. Shohei already has 2. You can't not put him in the pool of people we put in. You got to put in Fernando.
A little more longevity.
Right, that's right. You got Fernando in there. Hey man, Steve Garvey was my icon, and there's still a bunch of us still pining for the day that Steve Garvey will get where the
all-time franchise leader in home runs.
The Veterans Committee will put him in. And at some point, maybe we'll see. I guess all depends. If Mattingly ever gets in, then Garvey better get in. There. Who else is in our group? You'd have Tommy Lasorda. You'd have Vin Scully. You'd have maybe Walter Alston, who's, I guess, was he manager longer than Tommy? Did he end up 4 years? Right around the same. About the same on that front. So
Don Drysdale. There's a lot of people.
That's why I wanted more than one Mount Rushmore. We have a pitching Mount Rushmore. We could have a off field. I mean, Branch Rickey, right? That's somebody you'd have to consider.
That's too easy.
All right, so we got Jackie is one.
Jackie's hard. Jackie's one.
Who else is to you a no-brainer?
To me, it's a no-brainer. It's Vin Scully. We talked about the impact he is, the fact that he was foundational for generations of Dodgers, that he helped legitimize the Dodgers as they came to LA.
I think the rule we came up with is sort of like if you say the name and the first thing you think of is Dodgers, they belong on the Mount Rushmore, right? Jackie Robinson.
Or if you say Dodgers, what are the first people
you think of, right? So Jackie and Vin probably are one, too.
Yeah.
You can't really, you start there. I'd argue the next two this is where you would debate. I don't think anybody's going to debate us on Jackie or Vin. Now I know where I'd go next.
Who you got?
I would go Koufax next. But I'm mindful that it's a little more meaningful to Jewish Americans. So I accept that premise. And it's a short career. It's all of those things. But he is, I think when you say the word Sandy Koufax, there's only one team you think of.
I'm actually with you on it. Just because, help make the Dodgers what they were in the 60s. To me, it's more with people that are older than me, the way they look at Koufax, I honor and respect their reverence for him. So therefore, I revere him.
Mm.
And I've seen the reaction to him.
If you hadn't been an LA sports writer, do you think you'd feel this?
No.
Okay.
No. But seeing what he meant.
My only concern, I will say this. I'm going to argue with myself here, right? The argument against is well, that's not just longevity, but I think about my 18-year-old son. I have to explain who Koufax is. I don't have to explain who Jackie is. And I even don't have to explain who Vin is.
Right.
But I actually do have to tell him the story. I got to tell him, there's not a lot of highlights of Koufax, right? There's less TV. There's less of everything.
But the beauty of this exercise is your Mount Rushmore. So you get to the people that are the most Dodgerific to you.
Yeah.
Right. And so our first three were actually in alignment on it.
Yeah. We've spoiler alert, we don't have the same four.
My fourth is Tommy Lasorda.
Yeah.
Because he just helped make, Dodger blue. He was just such an advocate for the Dodgers and for baseball in general.
He's the one that used the expression, I bleed Dodger blue the first time.
Dodger blue.
Wasn't that the
big
first
Dodger
one
in the sky?
Yeah.
All those things. Like he just helped. The way he talked about the Dodgers made them feel like much bigger. They weren't just a sports franchise, right? And we know they mean more than sports. And we talked about how the Lakers had kind of surpassed them. Well, these last few years, the Dodgers have recaptured that. They are a Los Angeles team. They were there before the Lakers.
That's right.
They are the foundational team.
And now that Angelinos can see him on TV again, that helps, right? Not being on TV for that about 3 or 4 year period there.
Wasn't quite that long. That was another knock against the Dodgers when they went to this new cable or regional sports network, and it wasn't available. You couldn't get on DirecTV. You couldn't get on some of the biggest cable providers in LA, and that was like the tail.
Like I said, my buddies were buying VPNs in order to watch it on extra MLB extra.
So, what would be your counter argument against Tommy?
So the counter against Tommy for me would be
maybe your argument for someone else.
Well, it's more of a for, and why I wouldn't put Tommy is. Actually has to do with the guy I put in fourth, which is, Tommy's managing decisions when it came to pitchers weren't always the greatest. And did he cost pitchers their careers? Did some of their careers get cut short? And my biggest one is Fernando. Now, for me, I put Fernando on the Mount Rushmore. And that's why it really bothers me he's not in the Hall of Fame. Because here you have the Dodgers who have plenty of Hall of Famers. And it's hard to say, well, the most iconic people, how come one of them's not in the Hall of Fame? That's how important I think Fernando is. Now, the only thing I will put on both of us is you covered, your formative years for Tommy, my formative years for Fernando. Like, are people going to feel this way? Fernando's another one. Hard to explain to my son. Hard to explain to the 21st century Dodger fan how important and how iconic he was. So that would be, but Fernando for me, because he healed a big part of the city. And I think the value to the Dodgers as being Latin America's team, right? First, that's a big deal.
I mean, you can make the argument, for example, Dave Roberts has won more World Series with the Dodgers than Tommy did as a manager, right? So, but it speaks to, like, when I think of Dodger manager, I'm going to think of Tommy over Dave. Just
but today's
he's what I think of when I think of a manager of the Dodgers, because he was the manager of the Dodgers from before I started watching them up until 1996.
When the AI versions of us do this show in 50 years and go back and do the Dodgers again, the way we've changed managing and the way that they aren't the lead personality of the team anymore.
It's dictated by the numbers and the algorithms.
We will probably have a hard time explaining how important managers were in the 20th century. They're less important in the 21st century.
Even though you can make the case that Dave Roberts is a better manager than Tommy Lasorda, certainly hasn't blown through pitchers' arms, he's not a bigger personality than Tommy. I mean, that's part of what this is about, is the fact that Tommy just had this, oversized personality that just made the Dodgers seem bigger than life. He was a larger than life figure, and as a result, the Dodgers were a larger than life franchise, in part because of him.
And in many ways, they weren't as successful as they should have been in his era, but he made them seem bigger because
we talked earlier. I put them on the same plane as the Big Red Machine and all those great 70s teams, even though they didn't win a World Series in a decade. And that's partly Tommy's salesmanship.
That's a great way to put it.
But the legacy of Fernando, I mean, what hurts him, he only won 173 games.
Yeah.
And baseball is so numbers oriented. We talked off air about how there's a space in the Basketball Hall of Fame for Yao Ming because of what he meant, for opening the NBA for Asia. And what he's meant, for basketball in Asia. So baseball doesn't look at it that way.
So that's our case. The Los Angeles Dodgers.
Who you got?
That's our Mount Rushmore. This is now a dynasty. And I really think the last 10 years has cemented them, because they have finally done something that they arguably spent the entire 20th century trying to do and never got there. They caught the Yankees.
It's amazing when you travel now around the world, and this is a Shohei phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
You see that LA cap.
Now more than you see the NY cap.
Paris to Vancouver to Australia, that LA Dodger
and
cap.
It used to be the NY cap.
Yes.
And now you see the LA cap. It's fascinating. That's the end of our episode 1. We are the next episode and the next dynasty we're going to tackle is going to be in the NFL, and it is
the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this
Dynastic.
Yeah, that'll be coming up on our next episode. Thanks for giving us a chance here on episode 1. We will have an icon of the Dodgers helping to talk a little bit more and unpack some of these stories for you. But when we see you next time with a big deep dive, it'll be about the Pittsburgh Steelers.